Chapter 750. P.S. Saturday, 2 hours later. As the voice rose, a handsome young Taoist folded his sleeves and walked into the inner room. The strong cloud above his head melted into light and gathered qi. It seemed to separate and merge, glowing with 5 colors. The strong qi around his body surged like the tide and the sea. Zhang Boyan was shocked. He stood up and said, "Manor head?" He immediately reacted and looked outside. He lowered his voice and said, "Is the perfected master outside an elder of Manor Head's sect?" Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. Zhang Boyan's expression changed slightly and he took 2 steps back. Although he had joined Zhang Yan's sect, he was still from the Devil Sect's Netherspring. If he was careless and offended the perfected master Dongtan, he would have no way to reason with him. So he slowly retreated to the side and didn't say anything. When Go Sumin heard that it was the sect master of Hanyuan, he couldn't help but feel happy. He heard clearly that the perfected master Dongtian outside was this sect's elder. It wouldn't be difficult for him to protect them. He also stood up and bowed. "Is this sect master Zhang? I'm Go Sumin. Nice to meet you." Zhang Yan raised his hand and returned the bow. He smiled and said, "So you're sect master Wu. A few days ago, I received a letter from Zhang saying that fellow Taoist Wu is willing to submit your sect to Hanyuan. Is that true?" Go Sumin shook his head and sighed. He said with a sorrowful expression, "My disciples are useless and couldn't protect the sect. I'm ashamed to face the founder. Now I have nowhere to go. Fortunately, I was recommended by Zhang. I want to ask for your protection. However, I also know that this matter involves Fengxiang Sword School. If sect master Zhang is not willing to accept me, I don't dare to complain." Zhang Yan thought for a while. He asked, "How many Quantumin disciples does fellow Taoist Wu have?" Go Sumin sighed deeply and said, "There are 19 of us. One of them is my junior apprentice brother, who is also a Yuanyin practitioner. There are 12 other disciples, and the rest are servants." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He smiled and said, "I didn't come here for anything else. I'm here to receive my fellow Taoists." Go Sumin raised her head and looked at Zhang Yan in disbelief. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Sect leader Zhang, are you saying that you're willing to accept us?" He hesitated for a moment, then carefully asked, "Then if I, Quantumin, join your sect, can I still open a courtyard and accept disciples?" What he feared the most was that after entering the Deep Abyss sect, he would no longer be able to pass on his sect's teachings. If that was really the case, he could only think of another way. Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "Your Quantumin will be considered a lower sect of my Deep Abyss sect. Fellow Taoist Wu and your junior apprentice brother can become my sect's guests. You can choose a place to live in the Divine House Mountain and open your doors to pass on your teachings without any restrictions. Just like in Nanwu Mountain." When Go Sumin heard this, she couldn't help but feel overjoyed. This was clearly protecting Quantumin under the wings of the Deep Abyss sect. He couldn't help but shed tears of gratitude. Lifting the hem of his robe, he bowed and said, "Sect leader Zhang's great kindness, I'm afraid I won't be able to repay it in this life. In the future, as long as you are a disciple of Quantumin, you will definitely serve the Deep Abyss sect as your master and will never betray it." Zhang Yan took a step forward and helped him up. He said, "In the future, you will be a member of the sect. Headmaster Wu, there's no need to stand on ceremony." When he first paid attention to Quantumin, it was to make it easier for him to interfere with the matter of the seal. He had never thought of bringing him into the sect. But now that he was willing to rely on them, he wouldn't push him away. After all, there were still 2 Yuanyin cultivators in the sect that were worth recruiting. As for what Fengxiang Sword School would think, he didn't care. The purpose of this trip was to cause trouble for Ku Xian and Fengxiang. At this moment, Shen Dong, who was standing at the side, walked up and bowed to Zhang Yan like an adult. His eyes widened, he raised his head and asked, "Taoist, just now, you said that there's a legacy that you're going to give to Xiao Tong. Is that true?" Go Sumin hurriedly said, "This is my junior apprentice brother Shin's son. His name is Shen Dong. If it wasn't for junior apprentice brother Shen willingly staying behind for me, we definitely wouldn't have been able to escape. Sigh, I've let them down." Zhang Yan looked over and asked, Are you really willing to learn? Shen Dong nodded vigorously and said, Xiao Tong is willing. Zhang Yan slowed down his tone and said, You're the nephew of Headmaster Wu and the descendant of an elder in Quantum Inn. Naturally, you can inherit the mystical skills of the sect. With your potential, if you're nurtured carefully, you might even surpass Headmaster Wu in the future. As for my legacy, although it's not simple, it's been thousands of years since it was passed down. There aren't many people who can guide you, and you might even receive great karma. Have you really thought this through? Since he had obtained the 9-life pearl, he should find a successor for the spirit returning sect. Although he didn't know if the spirit returning sect had a path to Tao, at least it had a way to become a grotto. If there was a person with deep roots and a strong will, it wouldn't be difficult to establish a sect, but it wouldn't be difficult for him to become a hero. This Xiao Tong in front of him was a suitable candidate. However, this sect was destroyed by Dami years ago. Once he accepted the Tao child, he would have to bear the karma. Shen Dong's little face showed a determined expression and said, Father once said that there is no way to enter the grotto in Quantum Inn martial arts. Even if I practiced it, I would at most be stuck in the Yuanying state for the rest of my life. I would never have any hope of avenging my father. Instead of that, I might as well choose another sect and seek to become a Taoist. As he said this, he knelt down. Zhang Yan laughed and said, All right, I'll see how far you can go. He took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and channeled his mana. He took a step forward and lightly tapped on Shendong's forehead. Shendong's body unconsciously leaned back, but he only felt a chill on his forehead. He touched it with his little hand and realized that the jade talisman was gone. Zhang Yan said, When you open your meridians in the future, you will be able to read the scriptures within. There's no need to rush now. Shendong knelt down and kowtowed. Thank you, Jinren. I don't know how to repay your kindness of teaching Tao. I hope Shinren will allow me to perform the disciples' greeting and serve you. Zhang Yan looked at him and smiled faintly. There's no need. If you don't understand anything about the martial arts, I'll allow you to come here once a year to ask for guidance. Go Sumin's heart sank and she said anxiously, Oh no, my nephew is smart, but this time he's too smart. If he wants someone to guide him, he can just say it openly. Jinren Zhang is the one teaching Tao, how would he ignore it? This time, I better not make him hate me. Shen Dong trembled slightly. It was obvious that he understood that Zhang Yan had seen through his thoughts. He laid on the ground for a long time and didn't dare to get up. Go Sumin sighed and went forward to help him up. She said solemnly, Dong, there are many smart people in our generation, but there are only a few who are truly successful. The path of cultivation still depends on one's own sincerity and hard work. Don't play any tricks, that's not the right path. Shen Dong lowered his head and thought for a while before he raised his head. Yes, Dong, thanks Uncle Master for your teachings. Zhang Boyan snorted disdainfully when he heard this. The path of cultivation was filled with competition. What path could there be if one only cultivated? It was necessary to be scheming. If one saw an opportunity, one had to snatch it at all costs. If one gave in and was modest in all aspects, how could one compete with others? No matter what, there were 3 Yuanying perfected persons in Quantum Inn. They had thousands of years of legacy. If they weren't weak in all aspects, how would they have fallen to such a state today? He didn't think that Shendong's thoughts just now were wrong. Instead, he had a thought of cherishing talent. However, Shendong had been by his side for so long, but he didn't have such thoughts. It could only be said that the two of them weren't fated to be master and disciple. Zhang Yan's expression changed, and he looked like he was listening. After a while, he said in a low voice, Zhang, bring sect leader Wu and the rest back to the mountain to settle down. My uncle master is here, so you don't have to worry that someone will come and stop you. Zhang Boyan replied, I understand. Go Sumin cupped her hands and said, I'll go arrange it now. The two of them cupped their hands at Zhang Yan and brought Shendong out. After the disciples of Quantum Inn arrived at this celestial city, to prevent any accidents, they gathered at one place. In just a short while, all of them were found. After a short discussion, they quickly boarded the flying boat. They shook their talismans, and a light cloud rose from the bottom of the boat. bringing them out of the celestial city. However, out of cautiousness, they didn't go straight north. Instead, they headed west and prepared to take a detour from the West Sea realm to the Shenwu mountain. However, they had only traveled 300 to 400 miles when the body of the boat suddenly trembled. Spiritual vigor surged like a tide, and the people on the boat swayed. Wu and Zhang saw that the situation wasn't good, so they quickly suppressed it with Pavilion Master Qian. After traveling another 100 miles, it finally calmed down. Everyone had just calmed down from the shock, and they didn't know what happened just now. Suddenly, someone shouted and pointed to the back. "Look!" Everyone turned around to look, only to see 3 streams of clear air that connected to the sky and the sea appear in the sky, tumbling and surging, coming from 3 directions. Although they were separated by hundreds of miles, the sea was vast, and they could vaguely make out the outline of the 3. The one coming from the north seemed to be a huge brush wrapped in auspicious clouds. The golden and silver pole danced in the dark clouds. The one coming from the east was a large tablet with a coiled phoenix that looked like a talisman or a sword. Its tail feathers were swaying, and there were colorful stars. As for the south, it was a treasure cauldron with a round lid and no ears. It was filled with auspicious air, and the runes were floating. The 3 dermas spread out for 1,000 miles, and they were surrounding them. Go Su Min froze for a while, then she said, That's the people of South State's 3 sects grotto heaven." Pavilion Master Qian was also so shocked that he couldn't move. After a long time, he came back to his senses and said anxiously, "Senior brother, if the people of Grotto Heaven were to fight, we won't be able to resist them. We need to leave this place as soon as possible." Go Su Min said worriedly, "Those are the people of 3 Grotto Heaven. I don't know if Zhenren Zhang's master can handle them." Zhang Boyan sneered. Although he didn't know which Grotto Heaven Zhenren it was from Qinsong School, he didn't think that the 3 people in the sky were their opponents. He just said, "Headmaster Wu, what's the use of worrying about this? Pavilion Master Qian is right. If the people of Grotto Heaven were to fight, I'm afraid that the sea within 1,000 miles would be turned upside down. It's better to leave this place as soon as possible." At this moment, heaven and earth suddenly shook. The sea broke and the waves split. A towering mountain stood in the sky. Clouds stretched for 1,000 miles, and frost fell from the sky. It was so powerful that it confronted the 3 dermas from afar. Not only did it not fall into a disadvantage, but it also seemed to be overshadowing them. The flying boat under them was also shaken by the surging spiritual air. It was almost overturned. It took a lot of effort to stabilize it. This time, they didn't dare to look anymore. They shook the control talisman repeatedly, turned it into a light rainbow, and hurriedly flew to the west. Chapter 751. The 3 Dongtian Zenrens of the South Continent originally wanted to join forces to demonstrate their power so that the person who came would be afraid. However, after half a day, they still couldn't suppress the person in front of them. They were afraid that if this continued, they would really start fighting, so they took the initiative to withdraw their mana and returned to their original appearance. Gon shouting walked out and said loudly, "Which Shinren is on the other side?" The spiritual opportunity in the sky changed, and the clear and turbid air was separated. Shen Baishuang retracted his Dharma form and replied, "I am Shen Baishuang. I have traveled to Dongxing a few hundred years ago. I wonder if you have heard of me?" The 3 of them had heard of this name. Gon shouting seemed to have realized something and said, "So it's Shinren Shen. I've heard of you for a long time." As he said this, he cupped his hands in front of him. Although he looked relaxed, he had seen how Shen Baishuang destroyed Zheng Weixing's Dharma. He knew that the person in front of him was not someone to be trifled with. Hence, he was on high alert. Although Hang Yuyen was a female cultivator, she had a fiery temper. She did not want to weaken her sect's momentum, so she said coldly, "This is the territory of the Kyujin sect. Zhenren Shen did not inform us before coming here. Isn't it inappropriate?" Gon shouting gave her a look and said with a laugh, "Taoist Hang, you're being too serious. Zhenren Shen is a cultivator from another continent. I don't think you know the geography of Dongxing. There are no boundary markers on the Nangguang Sea, so you don't have to be harsh." Shen Baishuang said calmly, I know where this place is and that this is the territory of the Kyujin sect. I'm here to meet all of you. Gon's shouting was surprised. Then, his expression turned serious and he said with a hint of caution, Taoist Shin, so you're here to see us. I wonder what's the matter that requires you to come here personally? Shen Baishuang looked at the three of them. He said, there's a quantum inn in the Nanwu mountain that has long been under the Hanyuan sect. However, the Fengxiang Sword School sent people to kill the elders and disciples of the sect and destroyed their spiritual veins. I have to ask for an explanation for this. Gon's shouting was stunned. Quantum inn? Wasn't this sect under the Fengxiang Sword School? How did it become the Hanyuan sect? It was just that he felt that this matter was too insignificant. After all, Quantum Yin was not a disciple of Fengxiang Sword School. If he wrote a letter, he could say something and ask for a favor. He wouldn't disrespect him. After thinking about it carefully, he came to a realization. Would a Taoist abode master really mobilize such a large force for such a matter? Clearly not. He was just using this as an excuse to show off his strength. Zhenren Ji chuckled and said, it seems like Zhenren Shen is here to condemn us. Gon's shouting fell out with you. He didn't bother to argue about the right and wrong between them. He chose his words carefully and said, then what does Zhenren think we should do? Shen Baishuang said straightforwardly, from now on, the area north of the Five Dragons River belongs to the Hanyuan sect. As soon as he said that, his attitude was already clear. He indicated that the Deep Abyss sect wanted to take the North Continent into their pocket, and with them holding the fort, the three southern sects should not try to get their hands on it. Hang Yuyen wanted to speak a few times. However, Gon's shouting stopped her with a look. This time, she couldn't hold it in anymore and screamed, what if I don't obey? Shen Baishuang said casually, I have already killed one person, but I don't mind killing a few more. His words were filled with killing intent. Hang Yuyen frowned and seemed like she was about to explode. However, she thought about it. In the end, due to Shen Baishuang's strength, she gritted her teeth and endured it. Gon's shouting felt that he couldn't make the decision alone, so he retreated. After discussing with the other two for a while, he came out and said, Zhenren Shun, we can agree to your suggestion. However, we have a condition. If your sect has disciples coming to the South Continent, you must inform us in advance. Shen Baishuang said plainly, so be it. He glanced at the three of them and turned around. A wisp of clear qi rose and disappeared. Gon shouting and Hang Yuyen wanted to use the qi observation technique to find out where he went. However, they were shocked to find that they couldn't sense where he was at all. The two of them didn't look too good. This meant that the other party had a technique to hide his qi. He could enter and leave the South Continent without being detected. They usually didn't gather together. If this person had killing intent, it would be easy for them to be defeated one by one. Ji Xiangping yawned and said, since there's nothing else here, I shall return to the mountain. You don't have to send me off. He cupped his hands in greeting, rose up into the air, and headed east in a flash. As he left, Hang Yuyen turned around and said, are you really going to agree to Taoist Shin's request? Gon shouting nodded and said, of course. If I don't agree, why should I agree? Moreover, you saw that person's supernatural power is extraordinary. He can hide his qi. It's better not to provoke such an opponent. Hang Yuyen bit her lips and said, I'm a little unwilling. Gon shouting sighed and said, me too. Seeing that Xianyu sect was gone and Zhongtai sect didn't have a Dong Tian to guard it, it was at its weakest. It was the perfect time for the three sects to take it down. However, Hanyuan sect took advantage of it for no reason. Gon shouting saw that Hang Yuyen still couldn't let it go, so he advised, don't think too much for now. The timing isn't right. Even if we go against Zhongtai, we won't be able to rely on just our disciples. In the battle with Gui Yuan Jun, most of the Yuanying cultivators from both sects were lost. If Qing Xianying sect didn't do anything, they wouldn't be able to shake Zhongtai with their strength alone. Hang Yuyen said hatefully, Ji Xiangping only wants to protect himself. He doesn't have the slightest ambition. If he was willing to join hands with our sects, he would have gone after Xianyu died. Why would he let Han Yuan grow? Gon shouting said, Yin, you don't have to be upset. I think it won't be easy for Han Yuan to take over Zhongtai. He pointed to the north and said, you need to know that there are more than one sect eyeing the North Continent. Hang Yuyan reacted and said, you mean the sea monster python? Gon shouting smiled and said, exactly. Once Zheng Daoren died, I don't believe they can still endure it. Luo Mingzi's cultivation isn't shallow. Previously he was afraid of our 5 sects joining hands, so he was suppressed overseas. As long as we pretend to be bystanders, we might be able to provoke the 2 sects to fight. Hang Yuyan thought about it and agreed, that makes sense. Then we need to go back and accumulate our strength and wait for an opportunity. In the Donghao Sea realm, Taoist Nunwei was flying across a pile of rocks. After traveling for a few hours, the sky gradually darkened. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. She arrived in front of a rugged and strange rock. She touched it with her hand and said to herself, it's here. She took a few steps back and stepped on the strong wind. She circled around the rock 3 times and pointed with her finger, saying, open. The rock sank down along with the sound. The water seemed to be boiling as it kept rolling. After a while, a formation door that was overflowing with spiritual light floated up from the water. After a while, a young man walked out. When he saw it was Taoist Nunwei, he quickly bowed and said, so it's Uncle Master. As he said this, he turned to the side and let the door open. Taoist Nunwei tidied up her clothes. She walked inside and entered the formation door. Once she reached the inner room, what entered her eyes were cow horn bead lamps. She followed the stone steps all the way up until she could not see the end of the fog. She sighed helplessly and said, why is there a need to be so careful? She shook her sleeve and revealed a section of her arm. She carefully calculated the spell in the door for a while before she stepped on a cloud and flew to the 37th cow horn lamp. She waved her sleeve and the scenery in front of her changed again. She suddenly arrived inside a spacious cave. In front of her was a soup pond that was more than 10 acres in size. It was sprinkled with beautiful flower petals. There was a riot of colors and a rich fragrance. The water in the pond was steaming and misty. There were small holes on the walls on both sides of the cave. Rays of light shone in from the outside and interweaved with the smoke, making it seem as if there was a rainbow jumping around. At this moment, the water rippled and a white fish swam over. When it arrived in front of her, it turned into a woman with a gentle appearance. She had a narrow waist and long legs. Her silver robe was in a high bun. She came ashore and half knelt on the ground. She held up a jade plate and opened her mouth to say, Taoist Wei, please take a bath and change your clothes. Taoist Nunwei looked at the Taoist robe on the plate and was slightly unwilling. She frowned and said, what is senior brother doing again? As a Taoist cultivator, even if there was dirt on her body, she could just circulate her mana and clean it up. There was no need for her to take a bath, so she was slightly against it. The woman revealed a pitiful expression and said, this is the Realm Master's special care. I hope Taoist Wei will not make things difficult for me. Taoist Nunwei was helpless. After hesitating for a moment, she could only take off her clothes and enter the hot pond to take a bath. An hour later, she came out of the water and changed into the robe on the plate. With the woman leading the way, she followed the vine bridge that connected 2 cliffs behind the hot pond and arrived at the top of a lonely peak. Looking at the surroundings, it was a surging sea of clouds. In the boundless heaven and earth, it was as if this was the only place they could stand on. The woman pointed at a stone manor embedded in the mountain wall and said, the Realm Master is waiting inside. Taoist Wei, please enter. After saying that, she bowed and retreated. Seeing that there was no one around, Taoist Nunwei went forward and pushed open the stone door, then angrily barged in. Inside the cave, there was a handsome young man with lips that seemed to contain pills and delicate eyes sitting in front of a table. He was holding a bamboo book and reading it carefully. It was obvious that he was beaming with joy when he saw her enter. He stood up in surprise and tossed the book to her. Junior sister, you're here. Quickly come and sit. Taoist Nunwei was a little dissatisfied, but seeing him like this, she could not lose her temper. She snorted and sat down at the side. The young man rolled his eyes and said with a smile, Junior sister, you're angry because of the matter of taking a bath just now. I have no choice. These few days, the situation in Dongsheng continent has been changing rapidly. There are a few heretical disciples outside who seem to want to take advantage of the chaos to find the location of my small granary realm. I'm doing this to prevent someone from doing anything to junior sister. Although Taoist Nun Wei was not convinced, she knew that what he said was reasonable. She said coldly, "If you didn't send a letter to summon me, do you think I'd be willing to come here?" The young man smiled and bowed, apologizing, "It's all my fault." Taoist Nun Wei said impatiently, "Hurry up and say it. Why did you summon me here?" The young man returned to the back of the table and sat down. He fixed his gaze on her and said, "Junior sister, do you still remember the 3 spiritual herbs you asked me for last time? This time, I'd like to ask junior sister to send some to Deep Abyss sect." Taoist Nun Wei was startled. Previously, because she owed Zhang Yan a favor, she had to persuade him in every possible way to get some spiritual herbs from this stingy senior brother. She did not believe that he had become more generous after a few days. She could not help but look at him suspiciously and said, "Senior brother, what are you scheming now?" The young man leaned back and used his hand to knock on the table. He chuckled and said, "Of course, I'm not giving them for free. Go and tell Sect Master Zhang that I have plenty of spiritual herbs here. He just needs to use the precious materials to refine the heavenly demon empress in exchange." Chapter 752. After Shen Baishuang intimidated the spiritual masters of the 3 sects, she went to meet up with Zhang Yan. The latter thought that the purpose of this trip had been achieved, so he followed her back to the sect. Because the abode was extremely fast, the 2 of them only used about 10 days to return to the Shenwu mountain. Although Quantamin and the rest were a step ahead, they were left behind. Shen Baishuang had to refine the heavenly furnace of earth fire first, so she did not enter the mountain this time. After a few words with Zhang Yan, she floated to the East Shenwu mountain alone. Zhang Yan returned to Zhangzhou Peak. This time, he came to Dongsheng continent under the orders of the sect master. On the surface, it was to avoid the attention of the sects, but secretly, it was to deal with the seal left by the ancestral master. After a lot of hard work, the sky demons were all taken care of. With Shen Baishuang's help, the situation of the south, and north of Dongsheng continent had been settled. If there were no accidents, there should be no changes for at least 100 or 200 years. Next, he only needed to arrange the affairs of the sect, and then he could cultivate in peace. After 2 hours, he returned to his cave residence. After sitting down, he called Jingyu over as usual and asked, "I was away for a few days, how is the sect?" Jingyu reported, "Master, there are 3 elders in the sect, and everything is in good order. However, a few days ago, a foreign cultivator suddenly came to the mountain, saying that he had something to discuss with Master. He asked about it, but he refused to go into details. I saw that this person is also a spiritual master, so I took the initiative to arrange for him to stay in the pavilion in the mountain. Does Master want to see him?" Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. After thinking for a while, he said, "Go and invite him up to see me." Jingyu bowed and left after receiving the order. About a moment later, a Taoist walked into the cave residence. As they walked, a Taoist entered the cave abode. He first looked at Zhang Yan, then he cupped his hands and bowed. Overseas itinerant cultivator Yang Xianlong greets Taoist Zhang. Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, "So it's Shenren Yang. I haven't been in the mountain for the past few days, and the people in my sect don't know what's going on. They've been rude to you." Yang Xianlong laughed. He said, "Zhang Men is too serious. Although the sky demon has been eliminated, the aftermath has yet to subside. It is only right for your sect to be more cautious." Zhang Yan raised his hand. He guided the air. "Taoist Yang, please take a seat." Yang Xianlong did not bother with pleasantries. He casually cupped his hands and sat down at the guest seat, straightening his sleeves. Then, he turned his head and his eyes lit up. "When I entered the mountain, I saw that many areas had been corroded by poisonous miasma. I also heard that many sects have fled and suffered this disaster. It will take at least 100 years for the Shenwu Mountain to regain its former glory. These were not empty words. Originally, there were more than 30 sects in the Divine House. When they heard that the sky demons were attacking, many of them knew that they could not fight the enemy, so they fled early. Only a few sects were willing to work together with them. It could be said that 9 out of 10 sects had left. Zhang Yan did not hide this and admitted, that is indeed the case. However, the Shenwu Mountain is mixed with crooks and honest people. After this incident, many of the unruly people have been eliminated and the elites have remained. For my Han Yuan, it is greatly beneficial. Yang Xianlong suddenly sighed and cupped his hands. Sect leader Zhang, please forgive me for being blunt. If your Shenwu Mountain had no external enemies, it would be enough to protect itself. However, there is the Python tribe above the North Sea, and it is close to large sects like Zhongtai sect. Your sect is sandwiched between the north and the south and is weak. Now that you have suffered a heavy blow, if you do not try to pull yourself together, the day of your defeat will not be far. Zhang Yan smiled faintly but did not say anything. Yang Xianlong was a little disappointed when he saw that Zhang Yan did not react as he had expected. However, he pretended to be anxious and said, I am not exaggerating. Although you have invited the help of a cultivator from the Grotto Heaven, that cultivator is not a cultivator of Dongsheng. He will leave in the future. On the other hand, your ability is a great threat to the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven in the continent. They will try to exclude you openly and secretly. When that time comes, the Han Yuan sect will be in big trouble. Zhang Yan chuckled to himself. This was just an act to shock him. From this person's words, it could be seen that he did not know who had come to the Shenwu Mountain and what had happened. However, he still casually asked, then according to Daoist's opinion, what should we do? Yang Xuanlong's spirit was lifted. He said, I have a plan here. If it succeeds, not only will it help you get through this difficult time, but the Han Yuan sect will also no longer have to listen to the 4 sections. Zhang Yan said calmly, I would like to ask. Yang Xianlong smiled mysteriously and said, do you know which sect has the most wealth in the Dongsheng continent? Zhang Yan shook his head slightly and said, I came from another continent, so I don't know much about it. Yang Xianlong raised his hand and gave a thumbs up to the southeast. He said, I will let you know that in the Dongsheng continent, in terms of wealth, it is not Zhongtai, Xianyue, nor the 3 sects of South Continent. It is the Shaotsang boundary. Zhang Yan smiled and said, what does that have to do with me? Yang Xianlong said in a tempting tone, the Shaotsang boundary is a small world created by Grandmaster Jingtsong. It is full of mysteries and treasures. If we can occupy it and move the Han Yuan sect into it, wouldn't it be 1,000 times better than being trapped here? Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and seemed to be a little interested. He said, I heard that the restriction of the Shaotsang boundary was personally set up by Grandmaster Jingtsong. For thousands of years, no one has been able to find the entrance. From what Brother Yang said, you seem to know where it is. Yang Xianlong moved his body forward and said in a low voice, to be honest, I have been searching for the Shaotsang boundary with a few senior and junior brothers for more than 100 years. We have a rough idea of its location, but we do not have the incantation to enter the formation. I heard that you have been in contact with the Shaotsang boundary's Wei Shuling. As long as we invite her here and cast a small spell on her, we will be able to get what we want. At that time, both our sects will go to the Shaotsang boundary. After that, you will be able to gain a foothold in the Dongsheng continent and no longer have to worry about foreign invasions. Zhang Yan looked over and said with a faint smile, since you have told me so much, I believe you will not be doing it for free. What do you want? Yang Xianlong chuckled and said, of course I have a request, but it's not worth mentioning compared to the position of the Shaotsang realm's realm lord. It's not convenient to say it now, but you'll know when the time comes. As he said this, he took out a letter and slapped it on the table. He stood up and said, I will treat you with sincerity. If you think it is feasible, send this letter and I will come to help. If you do not have the courage, then just treat it as if I have never come. Farewell. As he said this, he cupped his hands and walked out with his head held high. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Did you copy this person's appearance? Jingyu bowed and said, when this person came up the mountain, I had already copied his appearance. Zhang Yan nodded and said, take it to Song and Tang. Tell them to investigate this person's background and then report back to me. Jingyu was about to leave when Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he stopped him again, saying, wait, send another drawing to Zhao Yang and ask if he recognizes it. At the same time, in the Golden Bell Hall of Zhongtai Sect Master Qiao Huanzhuan and a few elders of the main sect were thinking about the future countermeasures. Elder Yen said in a low voice, the three sects of the south have been eyeing us for a long time. Zhongtai and Hanyuan are inextricably interdependent. It is necessary for the two sects to form an alliance. However, Zhongtai is the orthodoxy passed down by Grand Master Demi. No matter what, we cannot be reduced to a lower sect of Hanyuan. Sect Master Qiao smiled bitterly and said, Senior Martial Brothers' words are reasonable. However, with the passing of Zhenrenzhen, Zhongtai no longer have the confidence to speak. Hanyuan is different. With that Tao Zhenren behind him, why would he care about what we say? Elder Yen shook his head and said, not so. I heard from Martial Nephew Du that Tao Zhenren was invited by Sect Master Zhang from another continent. Perhaps he owed him a favor or offered him some precious treasure. This matter can only be done once. Sect Master, you don't have to take it too seriously. Sect Master Qiao felt that it was reasonable. It was difficult to invite a Zhenrenzhen. Maybe this time, Zhang Yan had used the sect's favor. It was impossible for him to do it again. However, he still frowned and said, without that Tao Zhenren's help, what's the use of roping in Hanyuan sect? We can't stop the three sects of the south either way. Elder Yen straightened his body and suddenly revealed a solemn expression. He said, Sect Master, if that Zhenrenzhen Zhang can invite that Tao Zhenren, why can't we? These words suddenly opened a door in front of him. Sect Master Qiao's body trembled and he was stunned. Then he let out an excited expression and stood up. After a while, he slowly sat back down and said with a hint of anticipation, Senior Martial Brother, you mean? Elder Yen Daoren said, we can ask someone to go to Tao Zhenren and persuade him. If he is willing to protect Zhongtai sect, we are willing to work together with Hanyuan and worship him. As long as we can hold on for a few hundred years and master our Grand Master's mystical arts and divine arts, Zhongtai, will be able to make a comeback. Sect Master Qiao was doubtful. He asked, will it work? Elder Yan's face was full of confidence. He said, I heard that Tao Zhenren is also a sect master. His sect is on the open sea, but the resources on the sea are few and far from being as abundant as on land. Zhongtai occupies half of Dongxing North Continent and has countless spiritual items. It's more than enough to support a sect. That Tao Zhenren might not agree. Sect Master Qiao frowned and thought deeply. He said, but there's one thing we have to worry about. Will that Tao Zhenren turn from guest to host? Elder Yen said confidently, it's fine if he's on the open sea, but if he really wants to enter our continent, the three Zhenrens in the south will be the first to disagree. Sect Master, you don't have to worry. Sect Master Qiao was finally convinced. He said, that's a good plan. But how do we find this Tao Zhenren? Elder Yen Daoren said, then we'll need Zhenrenzhen Zhang to act as a middleman and try to send more of those three spiritual herbs. I don't think he will refuse. Sect Master Qiao said in a low voice, to show our sincerity, we should send some generous gifts. He thought for a while and his eyes lit up. He said, I've got it. Before Zhenrenzhen Zhang passed away, he left behind a leg power. It's useless to keep it in the sect. Why don't we send it to Tao Zhenren? Elder Yen frowned. Is it Zhenrenzhen Zhang's mount? I've seen it before. It doesn't seem to be very obedient. Sect Master Qiao smiled. Before Sect Master Qiao passed away, he gave us a talisman that can control this beast. It's very obedient now. Elder Yen was overjoyed. He said, then what are you hesitating for, Sect Master? Quickly send the messenger over. The earlier we settle this, the earlier we can be at peace. Chapter 753. P.S. This is the last day of the 4 drip. If it's convenient tomorrow, try to update 2 times. After Jing Yu received orders to investigate Yang Xianlong's background, he returned to the cave residence to report. Master, according to Zhao Yang, the Taoist Yang who returned last time is from the Fuyang school of the heretical school. He was one of the people who participated in the siege against his father, Zhao Huan. When Zhang Yan first saw Yang Xianlong, he suspected that he was a cultivator from the heretical school, so he was not surprised. He only asked, "Did you see him clearly?" Jing Yu bowed and said, "I was afraid that I would go on a business trip, so I went to find Jinren Tang and Jinren Song to identify him. They also know this person, so it should be true." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, "When fellow Taoist Zhang returns, you can tell him and let him decide what he wants." Jing Yu said, "When Jinren returns, I will go and tell him." Zhang Yan said, "I will cultivate in seclusion these few days. If there is nothing important, you don't have to come." He was not interested in occupying the small granary realm. Perhaps there were many rare treasures in that small realm, and there might even be elixirs that he needed to find. However, he never had any enmity with the small granary realm. Even if there was a conflict between him and Taoist Nunwei, it had already been resolved. In such a big Dongsheng continent, he did not believe that he could not find enough elixirs. Why did he need to take over someone else's territory? On the other hand, Zhao Yang had killed his father, so he could not ignore him. As for what to do, it was up to his master, Zhang Boyan, to decide. There was no need for him to overstep his boundaries. After taking care of him, he turned and went into the inner residence to cultivate in seclusion. This meditation lasted for more than a month. One day, the bell in the cave rang softly. It traveled into the depths of the cave residence, causing him to slowly wake up from his meditation. He opened his eyes and a ray of light flashed. He asked in a deep voice, "Jing Yu, what is happening outside?" A figure flashed and Jing Yu came in. He bowed and said, "Master, that Taoist Nunwei has come. She said that she brought many elixirs up the mountain this time. Master, do you want to see her?" It wasn't that no one came looking for Zhang Yan these days. Many of the sects that had escaped from the Divine House Mountain saw that the heavenly demons had been killed and felt regret. They begged in every way possible to return to the mountain. However, they were all rejected by him. However, Priestess Wei was different. Jing Yu knew that this person had the elixir that his master needed. Not daring to make a decision on his own, he hurried over to report the matter. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said indifferently, "Ask her to wait in the half-mountain hall first. Tell him I'll be there soon." Jing Yu bowed and retreated to pass on the message. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. He felt that Wei Shuling's timing was too coincidental. He didn't know if it had anything to do with Yang Xianlong. He got up from the bed and walked towards the side of the cave. When he reached the inner room, he lightly tapped his feet and flew up into the air. He slowly walked down the stone steps and not long after, he arrived at the back of the hall halfway up the mountain. He then stopped and walked out. Priestess Wei was already sitting in the hall. When she saw him come out, she stood up and bowed, saying, "Sect head Zhang, long time no see." Zhang Yan raised his hand to return the greeting and said with a smile, "It is indeed so. It has been more than 30 years since we last met." Priestess Wei was slightly embarrassed. That day on the sea, she announced in front of her fellow Taoists that she would use elixirs to repay the favor. However, in the end, she didn't get much from the little granary boundary. However, she was a stubborn person. Over the years, she had used her family's influence to gather a lot of elixirs from all over the continent. Otherwise, she wouldn't have the face to come here. She took out a sleeve bag and handed it over. She said seriously, "This is the elixir that I found from all over the world. It's to thank you for your kindness last time. Sect head Zhang must accept it." Zhang Yan took a look and smiled. He didn't refuse and rolled up his sleeve to accept it. Only then did Priestess Wei relax. If the other party didn't accept it, she wouldn't know what to say next. After exchanging a few pleasantries, the two of them sat down. Priestess Wei just now sat down. Because she didn't want to beat around the bush, she said, "Speaking of these elixirs, I still have a lot in the little granary boundary. My senior brother said that if sect head Zhang is interested, you can exchange it with other things." He will welcome you. Zhang Yan smiled and said, the more elixirs, the better. However, I also know that there are countless elixirs in the little granary boundary. I wonder what kind of elixirs would catch your senior brother's eye? Priestess Wei said, I heard that sect head Zhang set up a formation in the Divine House Mountain with the people of the 4 schools Dongtian. They lured the heavenly demon and used the earthly fire heavenly cauldron to refine it. My senior brother doesn't ask for anything else. He just wants a portion of the treasured material that was refined by the heavenly demon. Zhang Yan's gaze deepened. He said, Oh? I wonder how your esteemed sect head knew about this? There were many rumors about the battle of the Divine House Mountain. However, other than the people of the 3 Dongtian of the South Continent who knew a little about the situation, no one knew about it. So how did the little granary boundary know that the heavenly demon was refined by the heavenly cauldron? Taoist Nun Wei was startled. She hesitated for a while, then said with some bitterness, To be honest, I do not know about this as well. I heard this from my senior apprentice brother. My late master had always doted on my senior apprentice brother. The rare treasures passed down by Grandmaster Jingtsong are all in his hands. Among them, a few have the ability to distinguish the qi of true consciousness and peep into spiritual vigor. Zhang Yan nodded and accepted this explanation. After all, Patriarch Jingtsong was also a mighty person who had ascended. It was not strange for him to have a few treasures that could observe spiritual vigor. Moreover, from what he said, he did not know about the specific situation. It was obvious that there were limitations. Come to think of it, at that time, both Tao Jinren and Shen Baishuang were nearby. If someone was spying on them, they would have noticed it immediately. Priestess Wei saw that he did not speak for a long time. She was a little anxious. She said, Are you going to agree or not? Zhang Yan's gaze shifted. He shook his head and said, Your senior brother's idea is not bad. Unfortunately, it is too one-sided. Priestess Wei heard his impolite words and was instantly dissatisfied. She snorted and said stiffly, Why do you say so? Zhang Yan smiled faintly. The heavenly demon treasure is very rare. If I give some of this to the people of the 3 Dongtian of the South Continent, could it be that they can't take out the spiritual medicine? Why would they want to benefit you, the little granary boundary? Priestess Wei could not help but be stunned. After a while, she was at a loss. She said, Then isn't it done? Zhang Yan smiled. If we both take a step back, there is still room for discussion. Priestess Wei asked anxiously, Then what should we do? Zhang Yan smiled. But he did not say it out loud. Instead, he comforted her. This matter is not urgent. Although I have an idea, I can only say it after I go back and take a look. Fellow Taoist Wei can stay in my mountain first. We will discuss it in a few days. As he said this, he turned around and instructed Jingyu. Bring fellow Taoist Wei to the mountain and choose a good cave abode to settle down in. Jingyu walked up. He bowed and gestured. He said, Taoist Wei, please. Priestess Wei was helpless. She could only stand up and bow. She followed Jingyu down. What Zhang Yan said just now was not perfunctory. He really had an idea. That day, the earthly fire heavenly furnace did not only refine the 8 armor pieces. There were also many ashes of the heavenly demon's body. They were all attached to the few pieces of Qingming wood. This was also considered a rare treasure in the world. He could take some out and give it to the little granary boundary. But it was not convenient to say this out loud. Otherwise, it would be mocking him for only being worthy of these dregs. However, even if the other party accepted this item, the spiritual medicine that could be exchanged for it would not be much. In reality, he would still be at a disadvantage. Thinking about this, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. If that was the case, then he might as well sell a favor to them. After thinking for a while, he took out a letter from his sleeve. It was left behind by Yang Xianlong that day. He raised his hand and lightly waved it, opening the seal. The letter flew up into the sky and turned into a ray of spiritual light, heading out of the mountain. Wei Taoist nun stayed on the mountain for several days. Under Zhang Yan's instruction, the Wang sisters took her on a sightseeing tour of various scenic spots on the mountain. It's just that her temperament was rather cold and she was not a refined person, so she was not in the mood to enjoy the scenery. Just as she was getting impatient, Jing Yu came looking for her again. He said, "Master wants to see Taoist Wei." Priestess Wei thought that there should be a result regarding the treasure exchange. She said excitedly, "Please lead the way." She followed Jing Yu all the way to the mountain. However, the route they took this time was different from the last time. They did not go to the main hall but to the belly of the mountain. Moreover, they went deeper and deeper. She could not help but feel puzzled. She asked, "Where are we going?" Jing Yu said, "Taoist Wei, please do not be suspicious. This matter was specially ordered by Master. You will know the reason in a moment." Priestess Wei suppressed the doubts in her heart and followed him to a chamber decorated with pearls. Other than a well in the middle, there was nothing else. Jing Yu pointed at the well and said, "This object is called the Yongming Well. It can observe the surroundings within 100 miles. It also has the effect of gathering spiritual energy. It was originally owned by Quantamin in the South Continent. Because of Fengxiang Sword School's coercion, it had no choice but to switch to our Hanyuan school. Chancellor Go Su-min is grateful for Master's kindness and offered this object of her own accord." As he finished, he used his hand to draw a circle at the mouth of the well. The originally muddy well water swayed for a while, and gradually a scene appeared. He said, "Taoist Wei, please come and see." Although Priestess Wei did not understand the meaning of this action, her curiosity was piqued. She went forward to take a look. She saw that the light was shining on the main hall halfway up the mountain. At this moment, there was a handsome Taoist with spirited eyes and elegant demeanor sitting in the hall. Not long after, she saw Zhang Yan coming in from outside the hall. The Taoist happily stood up to welcome him. After the two of them greeted each other, they sat down respectively. The Taoist's voice was heard saying, "I heard that Wei Shuling has been in your school for the past few days. I believe that Taoist Wei has already made up her mind?" Priestess Wei heard that the other party's words were related to her and was surprised. She could not help but show an attentive expression. Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Taoist Yang is really well informed." Yang Xianlong thought that Zhang Yan was really willing to join hands with him. His expression also became a bit more enthusiastic. He laughed and waved his hand, saying, "Me and a few senior brothers have been keeping an eye on Shao Tsongjing for hundreds of years. We know their every move. This is nothing." When he said this, Priestess Wei could not help but be shocked. She pointed and asked, "Who is this?" Jing Yu laughed and said, "Taoist Wei, don't be impatient. Master will explain to you later." Priestess Wei snorted. She could only force herself to focus and look down. At this time, she heard Zhang Yan say, "Shao Tsongjing can stand tall in Dongxing for thousands of years and no one has ever found the location of its cave. It must be extraordinary. What is Taoist Wei planning to do?" Yang Xianlong said, "I hope Taoist Wei can forgive me. This involves many secrets of our school. It's not convenient to talk about it in detail. Taoist Wei only needs to invite her here as usual. I can naturally do something to her." He paused for a while and said, "I will not change my previous promise. After the matter is done, Shao Tsongjing will be occupied by you, Hanyuan. Once me and my senior brothers get what we want, we will leave. We will not go back on our words." Chapter 754. When Taoist Nun Wei heard this, her whole body was drenched in cold sweat and her eyes were wide open. She never thought that not only was there someone secretly plotting to deal with Shao Tsongjing, they were also planning to do something to her. At this moment, she couldn't help but rejoice that the Han Yuan sect didn't have any enmity towards her. Otherwise, she might have already fallen into their trap. Although he didn't believe that the so-called secret technique of those people could really succeed, everything was just in case. If something really went wrong, wouldn't he become a sinner of the sect? She looked at Yong Mingjing with her mind, and waited until Taoist Yang and Zhang Yan stood up to bid farewell and left the hall before she suddenly reacted. She wanted to rush outside, but she had only taken a few steps when she had no choice but to stop. Turns out the mansion's door was already closed. She couldn't help but repeatedly stomp her feet and said, Quickly open the door and let me out. Jingyu remained unmoved and asked, "What does Taoist priest Wei want to do outside?" Taoist nun Wei pointed at the mouth of the well and said angrily, "This person wants to seize my small granary boundary. Could it be that I can still sit here and watch?" Jingyu had a smile on his face as he said, "Don't forget, Deng. This is the boundary of the Han Yuan sect. How can we allow Dao Zhongwei to do as he pleases?" Just now, Taoist nun Wei's mind was filled with thoughts on how to capture this person and force the few people behind her to reveal themselves. She had not thought of this aspect and was stunned for a moment before saying somewhat impatiently, Then what does sect leader Zhang want?" Jingyu said meaningfully, "As long as you leave the Hanyuan mountain gate, you can do whatever you want." Taoist Aunt Wei had also calmed down at this moment. That Taoist goat also had a Yuanying cultivator. Even if she made a move here, she might not be able to take him down. Moreover, from his words, he seemed to have a few fellow disciples. It would be better to send a letter to the sect first and ask her Shixiang to send someone over to help. She took a deep breath and said, "Just now, it's my words and actions that were out of line. Please don't blame me." Jingyu slowly returned the greeting and said, "Dao Zhang is too serious, Xiao Tong is not worthy of it." He reached his hand into his sleeve and took out the talisman. With a spell, the mansion's door opened with a rumbling sound and he stepped aside to make way. He said, "Please go ahead, Taoist priest." Taoist nun Wei cupped her hands. He quickly walked out of the cave room. Then, with a shake of his body, he rode the wind and left the room in the blink of an eye. Jingyu grinned. He threw out a flying boat. They rode up the mountain. Not long after, they arrived at the top of the mountain. They got off the flying boat and walked inside until they arrived outside Zhang Yan's inner chamber. He bowed in front of the cave door and said, "Master, that Taoist nun Wei is quite obedient and has already returned to her lodging." After a short while, Zhang Yan's voice sounded out from within. "As long as she doesn't cause trouble within the sect, there's no need to pay too much attention to her." Jingyu understood and said, "This lowly one will guard the Yongming well. Master can be at ease." In the following days, the mountain was peaceful. Zhang Yan meditated in the cave at night and came out during the day to guide the Wang sisters, Fu Baoxing, and the others in their cultivation. It was only when Taoist priestess Wei came to him again and said that she had urgent matters to attend to that he left the peak. This time, he was not the only one present in the hall. Zhang Boyan, Tang Jin, Song Chuyuan, Go Su-min, and her shitty, pavilion master Qian, were all sitting below him. There were a total of 6 Yuanying Zenrens in the main hall. When Taoist nun Wei came in, she felt uncomfortable being stared at by these gazes. Her actions were inevitably a little stiff. After she greeted with a straight face, she said her purpose of coming, "My family's head sent a letter last night, thanking sect head Zhang for informing us. However, the journey from Shaotsong region to here is too far. If we want to catch those people, we might not be able to send our disciples here in time. Thus, we ordered I to come and ask if we can ask Deep Cave Sect to handle this matter. If Sect Head Zhang has any conditions, please state them. As long as Shaotsong region is able to do it, we will agree." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He originally did not want to interfere in this matter. As long as they were out of his sect, he would let them kill them. Unexpectedly, this Shaotsong region's head was very careful. He probably could not tell if it was real or fake, so he made a heavy promise and pushed the matter back. However, compared to the safety of Shaotsong region, a few spiritual medicines were really not worth mentioning. Zhang Boyan said coldly, "You want us to work for you with just a few words on a piece of paper? Don't you think you're dreaming?" Taoist nun Wei bowed slightly and said, "My sect's head does not have the intention to make use of your esteemed sect. I have brought the letter here with a Dharma deed. Please take a look at it, sect head Zhang." Tang Jin stood up from his seat and walked down. He took the Dharma deed and looked at it carefully. He nodded his head lightly and turned to Zhang Yan. He cupped his hands and said, "Manor head, the seal on the deed is indeed from Shaotsong region. It can't be faked." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Taoist nun Wei, please go and rest first. I will give you an answer after discussing with the other Taoist friends." Taoist Nun Wei received the instructions in the letter and understood that she could not be too hasty. Seeing that there was no immediate rejection, she guessed that there was still room for discussion. She cupped her hands and retreated out of the hall. Zhang Yan looked down and said, "What do you think about this matter?" Zhang Boyan's voice was cold. "Since Shaotsang region is willing to offer the spiritual medicine, why don't you agree? Those people are my disciples' enemies. They will make a move sooner or later. Why don't we take this opportunity to clean them up?" Go Sumin had just entered the school of Hanyuan. In order to establish a foothold, she was also eager to make a contribution. She exchanged a look with her junior apprentice brother Pavilion Master Qian and stood up together to ask, "Sect head, the two of us are willing to help Shinran." Tang Jin calmly judged. After the Fu Yang sect was destroyed, only 3 to 5 people managed to escape, and they may not all be gathered together. Shinran Zhang's mana is profound, and with the help of Taoist Wu and Taoist Qian, according to common sense, it is not difficult to take down those 2 people, but we need to guard against the powerful magic weapons they carry. Zhang Yan deeply agreed and said in agreement, "Fellow Taoist Tang's words make sense. Since these people have the confidence to plot against Shaotsang realm, their strength is naturally not weak. Since that's the case, you and fellow Taoist Song should follow fellow Taoist Zhang and the other 2 for a trip." Song Chuyuan did not wait for Tang Jin's reply and eagerly stood up to accept the order. Ever since he obtained Corpse Zhao's treasury and the secret book, his strength had increased greatly and he had the intention to try out his supernatural power. Zhang Yan gave a few more words to Jingyu and sent everyone away. He then returned to his cave to meditate and cultivate. As the school of Hanyuan gradually grew stronger, there was no need for him to do everything himself. For such matters, he could let his disciples do it for him. With the 5 of them working together, their chances of winning were not small. Moreover, Song Chuyuan still had the corpse cult's treasure, the lifeless coffin. Although it was broken, it was still a killing weapon. With the help of this talisman, there was no need to worry about this mission. In the East Shenwu Mountain, Shen Baishuang sat in front of the earthly fire heavenly furnace. He quietly looked at the cave below and was using his mana to control the earthly fire. If it was the earthly fire heavenly furnace like the one in Qinsong School, he alone might not be able to cultivate it even if he used hundreds of them. However, this earthly fire heavenly furnace was on the smaller side and it was directly connected to the earth's lungs. This saved him a lot of effort. As long as he activated the earthly true fire and hid it in the cave walls, it could last for 300 years. However, if there was no Master Wu Dongtian's help, it would return to its previous state. However, he did not care about that. A few hundred years of use was enough for the school of Hanyuan. If Zhang Yan still needed it in the future, he would have to think about it himself. At this moment, he suddenly raised his eyes and glanced at the sky. He said, "Martial Nephew Han, since you are here, why not come down and have a chat?" With a whirl of strong wind, a middle-aged Taoist with a burly appearance appeared in midair. It was Han Wonka, who was once a guest of the Python clan. He looked at Shen Baishuang in shock and said, "Is it really you, Martial Uncle Shen?" When Luo Shi mentioned it to me, Martial Nephew did not believe it. Shen Baishuang frowned and said, "You are also a disciple of the Qinsong sect. Why are you always with those monsters?" Han Wonka smiled bitterly. He lowered his body and bowed. He sighed and said, "Can Martial Nephew still be considered a disciple of the Qinsong sect?" Shen Baishuang said, "That day, although head Shixiang expelled you from the sect, he did not take away your identity as a disciple of the Qinsong sect. Of course, you can." Han Wonka raised his head and his lips trembled. He said excitedly, "Martial Uncle, are you saying that there is still hope for Martial Nephew to return to the sect?" Shen Baishuang said in a low voice, "I cannot make the decision on this matter. But you also know the situation that day. Head Shixiang had just taken charge of the sect. For the sake of the sect, he had no choice but to expel the disciples of the other Shixiang sect. But now, the situation is different. With the arrival of the evil calamity, Shenmen sect and the evil sect are constantly fighting. If you are willing to help the sect, Head Shixiang will not reject you." Han Wonka had been wandering outside all these years. Before he left, He swore that he would not accept disciples without permission. He also could not teach Tao. He was also worried about who would guide him into Tao after his life was over. Now that he heard that there was hope for him to return to the sect, even if he was ordered to fight against the cultivators of the evil sect, he would be willing. He knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "I hope that Shen Shixiang can put in a good word for me in front of head Shixiang. I will do anything." Shen Baishuang seemed to be deep in thought. After a while, he said, "When I finish refining the furnace here, you will return to Qinsong with me. As for whether to take you back, it will be up to head Shixiang to decide." Han Wanka was overjoyed. He quickly bowed. But he did not stand up. His face seemed to be hesitating. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said, "Marshal Uncle Shen, I don't know if I can tell my Shixiang about this." Without waiting for Shen Baishuang to speak, he quickly explained, "The evil calamity has begun. Since they are Qinsong disciples, they will be willing to help the sect." He actually had some thoughts. Shen Baishuang was able to bring him back to Qinsong. This meant that there was a high possibility of success. But he was after all expelled from the sect. If he went back alone, he would inevitably be alone. But if he could find his Shixiang who were wandering outside, he would be alone. He could also look out for each other. Shen Baishuang did not comment. She just waved her sleeve. Han Wanka lowered his head in thought. He stood up and bowed deeply. He said, "I dare not delay Marshal Uncle's refining of the furnace. Marshal Nephew will take his leave first." When he finished, he turned around and conjured the cloud. He flew up into the sky. At this moment, at Zhongtai sect, they were thinking hard about the few spiritual herbs. Previously, they had given a lot to Zhang Yan. There were not many left in the storehouse. Especially the snake ring essence, which was even rarer. It was not easy to find. But previously, it was to thank Zhang Yan. They did not put in much effort to find it. But this time, it was a matter of life and death. Naturally, it was different. They used all their strength. They almost turned all the celestial cities in North Continent upside down. Only then did they gather 60 years' worth of spiritual herbs. Elder Bai brought the white rhinoceros and many other rare treasures to Deep Abyss sect. Chapter 755. Elder Bai left Hope Voice Mountain and traveled for half a month before arriving at Songzhu Peak. On the second day, he was led to the hall to greet Zhang Yan. After greeting, he first stated his purpose of coming, saying that he wanted to invite Tao Jinren to worship Zhongtai. He then said, "When I came, sect leader Qiao said that if Jinren Zhang is willing to do this, our sect will reward you handsomely." The three sects of the South Continent had their primordial qi damaged in the battle with Primogenite. They had not made any moves in the past few years, quietly licking their wounds. However, Zhongtai had more than one enemy. Above the North Sea, the Python tribe was ready to make a move. Especially after learning of Jinren Zhang's death, they attacked frequently, sending demons to bypass Shenwu Mountain and invade from the Donghao Sea. There was also a rumor that the Luo family had found Xianyu sect's ambassador, Chunyu Ji, and were prepared to work together to take back the sect's old haunt. This was a blow to Zhongtai's life. Back then, they did not kill Elder Xianyu, leaving behind a great hidden danger. Xianyu sect had only been destroyed for a few decades. With the support of the Python tribe, it was very likely for them to rise again. Zhang Yan was very clear that the Python tribe did not know the attitude of the three sects of South Continent. They were still probing and did not make any big moves. However, once they understood the situation, they would probably make a move. To Zhongtai, the situation was very urgent. If Zhongtai was destroyed by the Python tribe, it would not be what he wanted. If the situation in the continent was chaotic, it was hard to say if it would affect his cultivation. He could find a way to inform Tao Jinren about this. As for whether Jinren Dongtian would be willing to come, it was unknown. After all, if Luo Mingze was determined to come to land, he only needed to find a way to make the Carp tribe work. Keeping a close eye on the Clear Feather sect, he could avoid any worries. Elder Bai saw that he was deep in thought. He thought that he was still hesitating, so he gave a look to a disciple behind him. The disciple understood and immediately brought out a black jade plate. There were 2 items on it, both of which were covered by a silk cloth. Elder Bai cupped his hands together and said, "Sect leader Zhang, one of these items contains the 3 spiritual herbs that you require. After the matter is completed, there will be another reward. As for the other item, before Taoist Zheng passed away, he said that he would give you." Zhang Yan said in surprise, "Left by Jinren Zheng? Give it to me." Jing Yu walked forward, took the black jade plate, and presented it to him. As soon as Zhang Yan thought about it, a breeze blew over. The silk cloth fluttered to one side, revealing the item underneath. On the left was a half-foot-high porcelain urn, and on the right was a turtle shell shaped like a beautiful jade. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be the jade turtle shell that was given to Zheng Weixing. His eyebrows raised. He asked, "What else did Jinren Zheng say?" "By Changfeng Daoren, Taoist Zheng only said that he wanted to give this item to you, he didn't say anything else." Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes and couldn't help but guess the purpose of this move. At this time, he suddenly saw that the seam of the jade turtle shell was filled with spiritual energy, as if there was a brilliance coming out. His heart moved and he went up to lift it. He saw that there was actually a talisman inside the shell. He didn't take it, but focused his eyes and opened the talisman. He found that it was a letter left behind by Zheng Weixing. The general meaning was that he recklessly used the restriction to prolong his life, causing him to meet his fate. It was his own fault, and no one else was to blame. After reading it, Zhang Yan figured out the meaning. He originally thought that Zhong Tai knew why Zheng Weixing died, but for the sake of the sect's overall situation, he had to endure it. But looking at this letter, Zheng Weixing obviously didn't say why he met his fate. This was clearly to deliberately leave room for reconciliation between the 2 sections. Of course, putting aside his life, this choice was still very beneficial to Zhong Tai for the time being. He put down the letter and looked at the jade turtle shell. He didn't expect that the other party didn't use this item and that it would return to his hands. He raised his head and said to the bottom of the stairs, "I already understand Jinren Zheng's intentions. I can also pass on Tao Jinren's words on Zhong Tai's behalf. However, what Jinren thinks is not something I can control." Elder Bai hurriedly said, "Yes, yes. As long as we receive clear Feather Sect's reply, regardless of whether it succeeds or not, our sect will engrave it in our hearts and have no complaints." Zhang Yan was secretly surprised. Zhong Tai was afraid that he would only take the gift but not do anything, so he still wanted a reply. He said indifferently, "If that's the case, Elder Bai, please go and rest first. It takes some time for letters to come and go. If I receive a reply, I will naturally send someone to inform you." Elder Bai's heart was already at ease when he received the promise. He bowed deeply and led the accompanying disciples to wait for news. Zhang Yan picked up the porcelain jar from the table, wiped off the clay seal, and carefully counted. He discovered that the amount of spiritual herbs sent by Zhong Tai this time was almost equal to the total of the previous few times. It could be seen that Zhong Tai had put in a lot of effort. He smiled and put away the 2 items. He took out a golden talisman letter and folded it. After opening it, he took out a brush and dipped it in ink. After muttering to himself for a moment, he wrote a letter in a flash and stamped it with his sect's seal. He stretched out 2 fingers and made a hand sign. The letter folded into a talisman and flew up. Finally, it entered a jade scroll beside the table. With a light flick of his finger, it turned into a spiritual light and soared into the sky. His gaze followed it to the clouds and inadvertently glanced at it. He saw that the east was full of fire and red light filled the sky. It was getting more and more intense. He couldn't help but think, looking at this situation, Marshal Uncle Shin should have already activated the earth fire. It won't be long before he succeeds. When Shen Baishuang left, more than half of the disciples in the Deep Abyss sect also left. However, he also had 3 disciples here, so he could open the door and teach them. Especially the Wang sisters, recently under his guidance, they had all broken through the bottleneck in their shells and received the true seal of mana. Even if he didn't show himself, with the help of Zhang Boyan and the others, they would be able to control the situation. In just a few decades, Mount Shenwu could recover. At that time, This place could be said to be the territory of his Zhaoyu lineage. However, when he returned to the sect in the future, who would take care of this sect? As he was thinking, a disciple ran in from outside and went to Jing Yu's side to whisper a few words. Jing Yu waved his hand and sent him away. He then went up the stairs and said, "Master, Zhenren is back." Zhang Yan made an "oh" sound and said with a smile, Zhang is back? I think the matter has been settled. Quickly invite him in." Last time, 5 people from the Deep Abyss sect appeared and used Taoist Nun Wei as bait to lure Yang Xianlong and 2 of his martial brothers out. They killed 2 of them on the spot and the last one escaped with a movement talisman. At that time, Zhang Boyan used the Yellow Springs escape technique to chase after them. However, this time, there was no news of him for more than 6 months. If it wasn't for the fact that he had made a curse that if he died, Zhang Yan would definitely sense it and would probably think that he was lost outside. Not long after, footsteps came from outside. Zhang Boyan came in from outside the hall. Zhang Yan looked up and saw 3 clouds above his head. He was surprised at first, then he stood up and said with a smile, "Zhang Zhang's cultivation has improved again. Congratulations." Zhang Boyan was slightly emotional and said, "I just had a little bit of luck." In this battle, he absorbed the essence and blood of 3 Yuanning cultivators and took advantage of it to enter the 2nd stage of Yuanning. However, he also knew that if he didn't have a great opportunity with his lifespan, he could only stop in the Yuanning stage and have no hope of reaching the heavenly cave. Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Since Taoist friend has returned to the mountain, you can give Wei Shuling an explanation." Zhang Boyan was surprised and said, "Why? It has been more than half a year, is that Taoist nun still in the mountain?" At this time, Jing Yu couldn't help but complain, "Zhenren doesn't know that this Taoist nun's temper is bad and stubborn." She said that she must wait for Zhenren to bring back the last head before she can return to the mountain with peace of mind. Not only that, she still comes to the mountain every day to ask about it. "I really can't stand it." Zhang Boyan snorted and said, "That person has long been refined by me, including his skin and bones. His head is gone, but I didn't forget to bring back the keepsake that he carries with him." He took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and casually threw it to Jing Yu. Behind him, he nimbly caught it. Zhang Yan smiled and said to Jing Yu, "You also don't have to complain. That Xiao Tsang Jing hasn't finished his matter yet, but he already brought the 3 elixirs here. It can be said that he trusts our Hanyuan school. Then we should also finish what we started." Jing Yu hurriedly said, "Master is right." Zhang Yan said again, "Go and take a jar of the ash from the green brightwood and give it to Taoist friend Wei together with the keepsake. If she wants to thank me in person, just say that I am in seclusion and won't see her." Jing Yu hurriedly agreed and hurriedly went to make the arrangements. Seeing that there was nothing else, Zhang Boyan also wanted to leave, but Zhang Yan called out to him, Zhang, this time you have put in a lot of effort running around. After the sky demon is refined, there will be a lot of precious materials. You can go to the storehouse and take 3 jars of GMO." When Zhang Boyan heard this, his eyes immediately lit up. He had long planned to refine a few powerful demons to give to Zhao Yang for self-defense, but he still lacked a lot of precious materials. With the remnants of the sky demon, there was no need for other things. He immediately bowed and cupped his hands. "Thank you, master." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "In a few days, I will need to go into seclusion. I will need Taoist friend to help me look after the school." Zhang Boyan said loudly, "Don't you dare to not do your best." After saying a few more words to him, Zhang Yan ordered him to leave. He himself rode a cloud back to the cave residence and walked straight into the pill room. He placed the elixirs sent by Zhong Tai into the medicine furnace. Watching the furnace fire gradually burn, his eyes showed a look of deep thought. The amount of elixirs sent by Xiao Tsang Jing previously was also beyond his expectations. After refining the elixirs, there were more than 200 of them, almost 4 times more than before. If he refined the elixirs sent by Zhong Tai this time, there would be more than 300 of them in total. According to Zhou Chongju, to achieve Yuanjin Dharmakaya, a person with a 2nd-grade elixir would be enough to use 100 by Yuang. However, he was a 1st-grade elixir, so it needed to be calculated in multiples. Now that he had 3 times the amount, it should be enough. But now he was faced with another problem. To refine these essence qi, he could only refine one by yueing a year. In other words, to refine all of them, it would at least take more than 300 years. Although he had made a great contribution this time, and the mountain gate might not come to urge him to return, the opportunity would not wait there. If he did not accept it, it would be snatched by others. He thought in his heart, "This is too slow. Now it seems that I need to use the 9 numbers Taisha true scripture to deduce a method of circulation." Chapter 756. P.S. There will be more at night. Zhang Yan had an incantation that he got from Zhou Chongju. It was originally a secret incantation of the Zhou clan in Yuxiao school. Previously, there were very few Baiyuang fruits. He followed it and did not notice anything wrong with it. However, during the refinement process, he gradually discovered that the essence qi refined from a single Baiyu Yingxi was actually far from the limit that he could absorb. Perhaps this would be an excellent incantation for a cultivator who had achieved the 2nd grade of Dan. However, to him, it was a pity. For a cultivator who had achieved the 1st grade of Dan, not only would he need more materials for cultivation, the spiritual vigor that he could absorb during cultivation was also far beyond that of an ordinary person. It was like a vast ocean that could absorb hundreds of rivers, or a lake that would overflow when it was full. It was imperative for him to recreate the incantation. Fortunately, he had the Zhou clan's incantation as a foundation. There was no need for him to recreate it from scratch. All he had to do was to use it as a reference and deduce it again. It was much easier than reversing the 5 elements mystic technique. However, there was no rush. He could only talk about the rest after he had refined the Baiyuang fruit. Hence, he put this matter aside. With a flick of his finger, an incantation fell into the furnace. With a loud bang, the fire was transferred up. Gradually, the fog surged and covered his figure. He stayed in the pill room for more than a month. Soon, it was the day to open the furnace and take out the medicine. The furnace emitted a gurgling sound, like the cry of a toad. Even the pill room began to tremble slightly, as if he was in a boundless ocean. As there were many spiritual medicines to be refined, the power of water and fire was boiling. It was much more intense than before. Before the furnace was opened, he could feel that the abundant spiritual vigor could no longer be suppressed. It was about to burst out of the furnace. Zhang Yan had refined the Baiyuang fruit many times and was used to this situation. Hence, he looked calm and used his deep mana to calm the violent power. After another half a day, the rising power of the medicine had slowed down. However, at this moment, there was a loud bang and it dispersed in all directions. It split into hundreds of spiritual qi and rushed around in the furnace without any order. It struck the walls of the chamber with a dang-dang sound, as if it was striking a bell. Even the body of the furnace couldn't withstand the force and began to sway left and right. Zhang Yan was startled at first, but soon after, a hint of joy appeared in his eyes. This was clearly the result of the medicinal effect nourishing the inside and outside of the body, forming its own spirituality. That was why there were such vivid signs. Refining medicine also depended on luck. Only a grandmaster like Zhou Chongju, who had immersed himself in refining for hundreds of years without any distractions, would be able to raise the medicinal properties of each furnace to the highest level and give birth to spiritual opportunities. But ever since Zhang Yan entered the Tao, he had never encountered such a good thing. At this time, he had to use his firepower to attack fiercely a few times in order to dissipate the heat, but he couldn't go too far. Otherwise, the medicinal properties would be damaged. However, he had to suppress the spiritual vigor and adjust the fire to attack. This required deep magical power to maintain, and the requirements for the alchemist was not small. If it was a normal alchemist, he might be at a loss when he encountered this, and if he didn't handle it properly, it would be easy to make a mistake. Fortunately, when Zhou Chongju passed down the method, he did not hide anything at all. Zhang Yan's cultivation level was profound, so he was very calm and did not panic at all. Following the instructions in the Book of Pills, he held his breath and focused, patiently suppressing dozens of the fiercest spiritual vigor. Then, he spent another half an hour to tame the remaining spiritual vigor and mixed the medicinal properties. He did it step by step, and there was not a single mistake. Another day passed, and all the spiritual opportunities gradually converged into one. They were like a dragon swimming under the water, circling around the furnace, as if they were looking for a way out. The spiritual opportunities turned inside, and he nodded slightly, knowing that this furnace of pills was completed, so he retracted his magical power. The spiritual vigor in the cauldron was no longer shackled. In a split second, the spiritual vigor in the cauldron became clear and turbid. Most of the spiritual vigor rushed upwards. A loud noise was heard, and the cauldron opened. A majestic spiritual vigor gushed out. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He originally thought that this furnace of pills would have at least 200, and at most 300. However, he didn't know if the spiritual medicine was pure, or if it was by chance. It gave birth to spiritual opportunities, and the number was 10 times more than his previous estimate. He waved his hand, and a strong wind blew, and the white moon spirit fruits were kept in his pocket. He shook his sleeves. Since this matter was over, the next step was to deduce the incantation. However, he didn't know how long this closed-door training would take, so he had to settle the affairs in the residence first. He got up and left the alchemy room, and sat on the couch outside. He sent out a spell, and not long after, Jingyu entered the abode and bowed. "Master, what are your orders?" "Zhang Yan, has fellow Taoist Wei left the mountain?" Jingyu said, "That Taoist priestess is impatient. She left the same day Zhenren returned." At this moment he cupped his fists and said, "Just now Chu Zhonglao came and asked me to deliver a message to Leoi. He said that Mount Yipai wants to return to the Shenwu mountain. I wonder if Leoi will allow it?" When Guiyuan Jun attacked, everyone in Mount Yipai was afraid. Only Bai Zhangmen and his disciples were willing to stay, and even gave up their position as the sect leader. In the end, when the elders of the sect saw that the Shenwu mountain was safe and sound, they clamored to return. Zhang Yan asked, "What is Bai Zhangmen's opinion?" Jingyu said, "Elder Chu wanted to give them some face, but Bai Zhangmen is stubborn. He said that since other sects cannot enter the mountain after leaving, why should Mount Yipai be an exception? Therefore he refused." Zhang Yan changed his mind and said with a smile, "If that's the case, then we'll have to compromise. Go and tell them that if these people still think that they belong to the Shenwu mountain, they can first set up an altar in the eastern Shenwu mountain. If they do a good job, then they can enter the mountain again." He knew these people's temperament very well. They saw that Han Yuan was powerful and had the support of the heavenly abode. Even Zhongtai Pai came to curry favor with them, so they wanted to seek shelter. It was not that there was some heavenly abode in the Shenwu mountain that they wanted to squeeze their way in. Jingyu smiled and said, "Master is letting them off easy. I will go and pass on the order." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "When you go down, call Kai Wei and the others." Jingyu complied and nimbly walked out of the cave. Zhang Yan raised his head and looked out from a round door on the east side of the cave. Shen Baishuang was his shirshu. As a junior of the sect, he should go and greet him before he went into closed-door training. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the Wang sisters and Fu Baoxing entered the cave together. When they saw him, they knelt down and kowtowed together. Zhang Yan raised his hand and ordered them to stand up. After ordering them to rise, he turned to look at Fu Baoxing. This disciple's talent was even better than the Wang sisters. His cultivation had been improving very fast recently. Once he entered the third level of the mystic light realm, he would need to open his meridians. He estimated that he would be able to enter the core transformation realm at the age of 10. Most of the top 10 disciples in Qinsong school entered the core transformation realm at the age of 50 or 60. Although this disciple of his was not as good as them, he was not too far away. He was already above his expectations. "I'm afraid that this closed-door training will take a long time. If you have any problems with your cultivation, you can ask the 2 senior sisters." Fu Baoxing bowed and said, "I won't slack off." Zhang Yan nodded and looked at the Wang sisters. These 2 disciples had hatched a few days ago. After each of them had received the manual, the next step would be to hone their skills. So he said, after Chu Shidi and the others have gone with Shin Shu, the school will inevitably be empty. When the two of you practice your skills, when the two of you cultivate, you need to teach disciples and strengthen the sect. Wang Kading pouted and said, Master, I can't even teach myself well. How can I take in disciples? It's better for Big Sister to do this. Zhang Yan smiled and said, don't try to shirk your responsibility. If you don't teach yourself well, don't tell others that you're my disciple. Wang Kading's eyes turned and said with a sly expression, then Master will need to give me some pills and treasures. Otherwise, if I don't even have a gift when I take in disciples, wouldn't I lose face? Zhang Yan laughed and said, so you were waiting for Master here. But what you said makes sense. He pondered for a moment, then waved his sleeve and a ray of light flew down. There are many magic treasures I obtained outside in this bag, as well as some pills. They are useless to Master, so you too can take them. However, remember not to teach indiscriminately, lest you lose the will to improve yourself. The Wang sisters accepted the order solemnly. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and said, go. After the three disciples left, he sat for a while and walked out of the cave. He looked up at the sky and with a tap of his foot, he flew with the wind and headed towards the East God House. In just 2 hours, he arrived in front of the earth-fire heavenly cauldron. Looking down, he saw Shen Baishuang sitting on a rock and talking with two Taoists. He recognized one of them as Han Wanka. The other was tall and sturdy, he was in high spirits and stood there like a pine tree. As if sensing that someone was looking at him, he couldn't help but raise his head. When he saw Zhang Yan, his eyes narrowed and he immediately revealed a wary expression. Han Wanka also saw Zhang Yan and hurriedly whispered something in his ear. The Taoist was surprised, but his expression turned solemn. He raised his hand and bowed to the air. Zhang Yan waved away the wind and clouds and descended. He first bowed to Shen Baishuang, then to Han Wanka, and finally looked at the Taoist. Han Wanka said, Junior apprentice brother Zhang, let me introduce you. This is Kai Rongju, I's junior apprentice brother. In the past, we both cultivated under Master Li. Zhang Yan smiled faintly, so you are from the White Sun Cave. Han Wanka said in high spirits, this time, we will be following junior apprentice brother Shen back to the mountain. I think we will be in contact with junior apprentice brother in the future. Zhang Yan was surprised and looked at Shen Baishuang. He cupped his hands and said, then I must congratulate the two senior apprentice brothers. Han Wanka hurriedly returned the greeting and said, this is all thanks to junior apprentice brother Shen, we can return to the mountain. Shen Baishuang said indifferently, no need to thank me. Whether you can stand firm in the sect depends on yourselves. I will not come and protect you. Han Wanka and Kai Rongju hurriedly said yes. Zhang Yan said, Junior apprentice brother Shen feels that his opportunity has come and he needs to go into seclusion. I don't know when he will come out of the monastery. The big and small matters of the sect have been handed over to my two disciples and junior apprentice brother Zhao. If junior apprentice brother Shen wants to leave, I'm afraid I won't be able to send you off. Shen Baishuang flung his sleeve and smiled, we are Taoists, we don't have so many rules. Your cultivation is more important. You can go on your own. Zhang Yan did not say anything more. He cupped his hands to Shen Baishuang and said goodbye to Han and Kai Rongju. Then he rode the wind and returned to Zhangzhou Peak. The journey was smooth. Before sunset, he arrived at the sect of Deep Caves. After entering the cave, he sat down on the couch and first activated all the restrictions around him, sealing the inner and outer doors of the cave. After making sure that there were no loopholes, he reached into his sleeve and held onto the remnant of the jade. His mind sank into it. Chapter 757. Inside the cave abode, Zhang Yan withdrew his consciousness from the broken jade and counted with his fingers. Unknowingly, he had been in seclusion for a year. One day in the outside world was equivalent to 80 days in the broken jade. In this 1 year, he had used Yu Xiao's incantation as a foundation and successfully deduced a new incantation. However, when he tried it with the broken jade, He couldn't help but frown. This incantation could indeed refine 3 to 4 white moon insure in a year, but it had a huge flaw, which was that it couldn't completely refine the medicine. Refining 2 to 3 insure would only be equivalent to the original one. Although this increased the speed of absorption, it came at the cost of double the consumption of white moon insure. This didn't satisfy him. To cultivate the Yuanjin Dharmakaya, he needed 2 medicines. One was the yin of the white moon, and the other was the essence qi of Junyang. Both were indispensable. Although he had a lot of white moon insure, he couldn't get any more essence qi of Junyang. It could be said that the more he used, the less he had. If he continued to cultivate according to this incantation, at least half of the essence qi of Junyang would be wasted. Thus, after careful consideration, he decided to abandon the secret incantation of the Zhou clan. He only borrowed a few incantations and started from scratch. At this moment he glanced at a niche in front of the cave door and saw a bamboo scroll there. It was a talisman sent by Jingyu from outside the restriction. It was obvious that Jingyu had something to tell him. He raised his hand and put it in his palm. Flipping it open, it turned out that a few months ago, Shen Baishuang had finished refining the heavenly cauldron of earth fire and brought Wen Liang, Chu Mu Ran, and 2 disciples back to Donghua continent. Only Zhao Gu stayed behind to take care of the secular affairs of the sect with the Wang sisters. It was nothing major. He thought to himself, Uncle Master Shen has a way to hide his aura. Even if he leaves, the people in other grotto heavens won't know, so the sect should be fine. However, the heavenly cauldron of earth fire cannot be lost and should be protected by restriction. Junior brother Zhao is reliable, so I can leave this matter to him. As he flipped further, he saw that Tao Jinren had already sent a reply. He said that he could be the Zhong Tai consecration. However, he had to ask him to read the specific content. Zhang Yan rummaged through the bamboo slips for a while and pulled out a letter. He read it carefully. He nodded. He returned it to the bamboo slip. Then, using his finger as a pen, he used his magic power to write a line of words on it and flung it. He returned it to the stone niche. After finishing this, he sat down and adjusted his breathing, allowing his acupoints to be unobstructed. Then, he once again grasped the remnant of the jade and sank his mind into it, deducing the method once more. 2 years passed silently in the cave abode. Suddenly, one day, his body shook and his eyelids trembled. Then, he opened his eyes and pointed at the table. Immediately, a white moon essence flew up and entered his strong cloud. Then, he calmed his heart and focused his mind. He guided the 2 qis and slowly refined it. When the 2 qis combined, it was like a jade dew, like silver mercury. Yuanying from the bottom, it spread throughout his entire body. After flowing through the acupoints and meridians, it came out from the fontanelle. A clear qi rose up and brewed in the 3 strong clouds for a while. Then, it turned into a sweet rain. The cycle repeated endlessly. Every time it rotated, he felt that the spiritual vigor in his body increased. Not long after, all the acupoints in his body seemed to be activated. His body swayed gently, giving out the sound of gold and jade colliding. It was extremely clear and melodious. After operating for 3 months without moving, he had completely absorbed the medicinal effect. Not a bit of it was consumed. Compared to the original Zhou clan's incantation, not only was the effect greatly increased, many loopholes and drawbacks were removed. Moreover, the feeling of it was not something that he could understand previously. It was obvious that it was extremely compatible with him and could be passed down as his own secret heart technique. Although it took him 2 more years, it was completely worth it. He could not help but feel happy. He said confidently, with this method as a supplement, it is enough to help me achieve Yuanjin Dharmakaya. With a happy smile, he collected his qi. Without moving, he took out another white moon fruit and put it into the strong clouds. He refined it attentively and gradually immersed himself in it. Time passed unknowingly. There was no time in the mountain. In the blink of an eye, a whole 80 years had passed. In the lower house of the Deep Abyss School, a young man was holding the jade token in his hand excitedly, looking at it. The people around him came up to congratulate him. Senior brother Su, congratulations. The young man with the surname Su also cupped his hands in return and sighed. After 8 years of studying erosion inscriptions, this day has finally come. The north continent of Dongxing had gone through several dragon pillar gatherings and was ravaged by Yuanjun. Although it had been 10 years of recuperation, the vitality of the sects had yet to recover. Ever since Zhang Yan went into isolation, there were constantly demons coming from the sea to invade the counties and villages. As most of Zhongtai's disciples were from the big clans, under such circumstances, many feudal vassals sent their clansmen to the Shenwu Mountain to be apprenticed to their masters in order to protect themselves. However, if one wanted to learn Shen skills in the Deep Abyss School, they had to be under the tutelage of 2 elders. This required 8 years in the lower house. Not only did they need to have outstanding aptitude, but they also needed to have some achievements in the erosion inscriptions. The most difficult thing was that only one person was accepted every 8 years. A person's life was only 100 years. How many 8 years did they have? If they failed the first time, they would have to try a second time. The third time, they would have to try a third time. However, they were too old at that time. It was even more difficult to learn Shen skills at that time, causing many to shrink back. They could only settle for the next best thing. They only wanted to be accepted into the school and learn the art of exorcism. They did not want to learn advanced techniques. Therefore, after a few decades, the school had more than 10,000 disciples. The young man with the surname Su came from a remote village. This time he was selected. Since then he could be under the tutelage of the school's elders. His status immediately increased 100 times, and he was surrounded by his junior brothers. At this moment, a voice came from outside. Which junior brother will receive the jade token this time? Please come out. The young man with the surname Su was excited. He bowed to his fellow disciples in the lower house. Then, under the envious gazes of the crowd, he strode out and answered, Su Congzhong is here. Outside the door, a flying boat slowly descended, and on it stood a young cultivator with a raised forehead. He looked at Su Zhongzhong and said with a smile, Junior martial brother, quickly come with me to the flying boat. Su Congzhong responded with a strong voice. However, when he got closer, he found that the boat's railing was high and the 2 sides were smooth. There was no place for him to climb on. He was startled. Just as he was worrying about how to get on, the young cultivator smiled and gently grabbed at him. A wave of spiritual energy enveloped him, and he couldn't help but get on the boat. Just now that he had landed, he heard a voice in his ear, Junior brother Su, stand firm. He quickly grabbed the railing of the boat. He felt a wave of dizziness in his head. His vision blurred. When he opened his eyes again, he found that he was in the clouds. He was very brave and didn't feel afraid. Instead, he clicked his tongue in surprise. He looked up and saw 4 peaks in the sea of clouds. They all towered into the sky. He knew that was where the 4 elders of the school lived. At this moment, he inadvertently turned his head to look. He saw that in the depths of the fog and clouds, there was another peak that was faintly discernible. It was tall and majestic, much taller than the other 4. He didn't know that there was such a peak in the mountain. He pointed at it and asked curiously, May I ask senior brother? May I know who lives on that mountain peak? The young cultivator took a look and smiled. That is Congzhu Peak. Our school's master is in seclusion there. He then turned his head and said, to prevent people from spying on that place, the 2 elders had used their powers to cover up that peak dozens of years ago. Very few people have ever seen it. I didn't think that junior brother would see it the first time you came here. You're really lucky. Su Congzhong came to a sudden realization. His eyes were filled with respect. He had heard that 100 years ago, there was a sky demon that wreaked havoc. Everywhere it passed, people were plunged into misery and suffering. From the south to the north, almost no one could subdue it. Later on, it was thanks to the combined efforts of this sect master and several great cultivators that they managed to kill it. He heard that the reason why the sea demons only traveled through Donghao Sea and didn't dare to come to Shenwu Mountain was because of this sect master. The flying boat flew for a while and landed in front of a large hall on the eastern peak. The young cultivator said, Junior brother, you go in yourself. The two elders are inside the hall. Su Tsongjong thanked him and got off the flying boat. He tidied up his attire and walked in anxiously. Not long after, he arrived at the hall and saw that on the jade lotus thrones on the high platform, there were two fairy-like women dressed in white sitting on the left and right. Their bodies were surrounded by colorful clouds and smoke, and behind them, there was the power of wind and fire, rising and falling like the tide. The two women looked the same. Apart from their attire, it was hard to tell them apart. But looking closely, one could see that the woman on the left was dignified, while the one on the right had lively eyes. She was looking down with interest. Su Tsongjong didn't dare to look any longer. He quickly knelt down and kowtowed. Wang Kating looked for a while and said, "Sister, what do you think of this person?" Wang Kaiwei nodded and said, "After all, Shenwu Mountain isn't as good as the 9 cities of Qinsong. There are very few talented people here. This Su Tsongjong isn't bad." Wang Kating said, "Then who will be taking him as a disciple this time?" Wang Kaiwei frowned and said, "Sister, have you forgotten that I was the one who took him as a disciple last time? This time, it's your turn." Wang Kating pouted and said, "This person looks very old-fashioned. It would be boring to take him as a disciple. It's better for sister or junior brother Fu to take him as a disciple." Wang Saiwei's eyes became stern and she scolded, "Sister, don't take this matter lightly. All these years, you've only taken in one disciple and you're still unwilling. When master comes out of seclusion, let's see how you explain yourself." Wang Kating muttered a few words and was helpless. She could only straighten her body and said seriously, "Su Tsongjong, from today onwards, you're the second disciple." Hearing her unkind tone, Su Tsongjong didn't know how he had offended this elder. However, the joy of being taken as a disciple overshadowed everything else. He immediately kowtowed and said, "Disciple greets master. I wish master's immortal beauty will not grow old and your longevity will be as long as heaven and earth." Wang Kating blinked her beautiful eyes and said with a smile, "You're quite good with words. Get up, don't kneel." Su Tsongjong bowed again and stood up. Wang Kating was about to say something, but at this moment, she heard a sound in her ear. She tilted her head slightly and asked doubtfully, "Sister, did you hear something?" Wang Kaiwei listened carefully and also noticed it. She frowned and said, "Is it thunder?" The sound was indiscernible at first, but it grew louder and louder, like the beating of a drum. Each sound was louder than the one before, and even the 5 peaks were trembling at the same time. Not only that, the aftershocks spread far and wide, and many of the mountains in the Divine House Mountain were also affected. For a moment, all the disciples in the mountain were shocked and didn't know what had happened. Su Tsongjong was also surprised and looked blankly at the source of the sound. He saw that on the peak that he had seen just now, there was suddenly a burst of 5-colored brilliance. In an instant, it rushed out of the sky and illuminated the vast sky. It was a spectacular sight. Wang Kating's beautiful eyes lit up and she said with surprise, "Sister, this came from Tsangju Peak, could it be master?" Wang Saiwei's eyes also lit up and she said excitedly, "It's master, master must have come out of seclusion." Wang Kating leapt up from her seat, grabbed Wang Saiwei's arm, and flew out in 2 streams of colorful smoke. Floating astronomy. Chapter 758. The Wang sisters rode a cloud of smoke out of the peak, but before they reached Mount Songzhu, a gust of strong wind rose from the ground in front of them. The wind danced upwards like a tornado, spinning endlessly and piercing into the sky. Not only were they unable to get close, but it also caused the two of them to sway. They almost lost control of the evil energy on them and could only retreat in a hurry. However, the wind was so strong that it was beyond their imagination. The two of them retreated hand in hand but still felt strenuous. At this moment, a gust of wind blew over and protected the two of them. A voice said in their ears, "My 2 nieces, I am drawing upon the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth to refine my Dharmakaya. Do not approach." The two of them calmed themselves down and looked to the side. When they saw that it was Zhao Ge, they bowed and said, "Greetings, Uncle Master Zhao." Zhao Ge quickly excused himself. Almost 100 years had passed, and he had already cultivated Yuaning. However, standing in front of the strong wind, he still felt as if his skin was being pricked by needles. At this moment, another gust of smoke flew over from the peak and turned into a handsome young man with 2 swords on his back. He cupped his fists and said, "Uncle Master Zhao, greetings to my 2 senior sisters." Wang Kating said, "It's junior brother Fu, there's no need to be so courteous." Zhao Gu took a look at him and praised, "Martial nephew Fu is indeed talented, your mana has improved again." Fu Baoxing bowed slightly. There was no arrogance on his face. Instead, he said humbly, "You flatter me, Uncle Master." Zhao Gu nodded and turned to look at Mount Songzhu for a moment. His expression was slightly excited as he said, "I heard that when Yuaning cultivators achieve Dharmakaya, only those with great mana can stir up strange phenomena in heaven and earth. I didn't expect to witness it today." The Wang sisters looked over and saw a gap suddenly torn open in the sky. Countless colorful astral sand seemed to be attracted by the wind and gathered like a huge waterfall. It poured towards the top of the peak. On the other hand, the spiritual dust on the ground surged and surged up like a tower of sand. Between the two, there seemed to be a spiritual vortex that was difficult to see with the naked eye that kept sucking in. Colorful lights flashed outside. Not only was the Divine House mountain filled with light, but even the coastal areas of the Beima Ocean realm were covered by it. It wasn't just them, even the 10,000+ disciples on the mountain witnessed this scene, and all of them exclaimed in admiration and were extremely shocked. At this moment, a cloud of yellow smoke was flying over from the foot of the mountain. Wang Kaiwei looked around and said, "It's Zhenren." All these years, Zhang Boyan wanted to use the heavenly demon miasma to refine treasures, so he didn't stay on the peak. Instead, he walked outside the cold abyss gate and heard the commotion inside. "That's why I came here." As for Tang Jin, Go Sumin, and the others, they were outside looking after the immortal city and were not here. A moment later, he arrived in front of the 3 and took a few glances at them. He couldn't help but wonder, when I was in the sect, I had seen a few people achieve Yuaning Dharmakaya. There were a few who could affect the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, but none of them could compare to Manor Master's momentum. Even among the seniors, I have never heard of it. Wang Kating was happy to hear this and thought to herself, hearing what Zhenren said, it seems that Master's achievements are extraordinary. However, who knew that Zhang Boyan's words would change, and he said, "But the more it is like this, the more dangerous it is. When a cultivator refines this Dharmakaya, it is the same as refining another body. The mana and energy in the body will be like boiling water, both inside and outside. If one is not careful, it is easy for the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to take over and swallow the true fruit. If it is a light case, one will die, and if it is a heavy case, one's soul will be in danger. Most cultivators either fall at this step or stop at the sight of it." When the Wang sisters heard this, their expressions changed. They didn't know that forming a Dharmakaya would be so dangerous. They were originally happy, but now they couldn't help but worry. Zhao Gu chuckled and pretended to be relaxed. "Don't worry too much, martial nephews. Senior brother's mana is deep, and he has treasures to protect himself. I think he will be fine." When the 2 sisters heard this, they were slightly relieved. Although Zhao Gu was comforting them, he was also not confident. When a cultivator cultivates Tao, every time they reach a dangerous juncture, it can be said to be half good and half bad, and there is no way to safely pass it. Treasures may be able to win in a fight, but in this situation, it can't be of help. Success or failure, it all depends on the cultivator himself. Inside the cave, Zhang Yan's cultivation had reached the final juncture. The clear air above his head was like steam, and it turned into a cloud the size of 100 acres. It rose in spirals, like a canopy hanging on the peak. Auspicious lights kept falling down, and gradually expanded outwards, and mixed with the spiritual tide in the sky. His expression gradually became solemn, knowing that he had reached a juncture where he would definitely encounter it. The Yuaning Dharmakaya was condensed from essence, chi, and life vitality. If a cultivator's mana was deep, it was very likely that he could trigger the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. His mana was not comparable to others, so the spiritual vigor that he stirred was also much larger. There were two choices here. The better choice was to follow the flow of qi, allowing one's mana to follow the flow of the spirit tide, slowly adjusting it, slowly refining it, and waiting for it to dissipate. Most cultivators in the world would make this choice when they reached this juncture. However, if it were to drag on for too long, the abundant spiritual power in his body would be consumed by half. However, this spiritual power would be what he relied on to form a Dharmakaya. There was no way to replenish it, and if he used a portion, his future foundation would be less. He had painstakingly achieved the first-grade golden elixir, and also gathered the spiritual medicine to form the true vitality refining Dharmakaya. Under the change of the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth, if he was not careful, the advantages that he had accumulated before would be forcefully removed. How could he be willing to do this? If he was not willing to retreat, then there was only one choice left, and that was to resist it with his body. If an ordinary cultivator was here, he would definitely not dare to do this. The spiritual tide that was triggered when breaking through to the next level was a few times stronger than his mana. If it were to surge together, it would be able to instantly crush his body into powder and tear him into pieces. Moreover, once he embarked on this path, there was no turning back. Even with the protection of a secret technique that would not be passed down for 100 generations, it was still extremely dangerous. However, Zhang Yan was not afraid at all. A ray of light shot out from his eyes, and he activated the mysterious art of comprehending spirit. His body trembled, and in a split second, his eyebrows were like flying flames, and his red hair was like a flame. A ball of raging black flames rose behind him, as though it was a fire that could burn the heavens. He actually revealed the demon that appeared in the star stone. With a clear shout, he shook his sleeves, stood up, and stood upright with his head held high. He allowed the spiritual tide that was like the sea to repeatedly crash into him, but he managed to withstand it and did not fall. This resistance lasted for 7 days and 7 nights, and the spiritual tide that was wreaking havoc between heaven and earth did not weaken. Instead, it became stronger and stronger. Zhang Boyan was also speechless. He was not like Zhaogu, who had no master by his side for a long time. As an elder of the Netherworld Spring sect, he could really see what was going on. He thought to himself in shock, when Yuan Hongyang cultivated the Dharmakaya, it only took him 6 days and nights, and he was already praised by several uncle masters as a genius in the sect. I heard that in the thousands of years of the sect, there was rarely anyone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. I didn't expect that the master had already cultivated the Dharmakaya for 7 days, and from the looks of it, he still has some energy left. This kind of talent is definitely unparalleled among the younger generation of the Xianling 16 sects. But as Zhaogu watched, there was a hint of worry in his eyes, and he transmitted his voice. Shinran, I wonder if senior brother can pass this test. Zhang Boyan laughed and said, it doesn't matter. When the moon is full, it will disappear, and when the water is full, it will overflow. The most dangerous part of cultivating the Dharmakaya is the first few days. The spiritual tide looks strong, but in reality, it has already weakened. I think the master will definitely pass this test. You just have to wait and see. The Wang sisters and Zhaogu both knew that he was experienced and knowledgeable, so when they heard this, they were all relieved. Sure enough, not long after, the strong wind tide seemed to have lost its momentum, and it slowly subsided, no longer threatening. Another 2 days passed, and a long sound that sounded like a bell or a chime could be heard, and in an instant, it spread to thousands of mountains and tens of thousands of rivers. On the peak of the mountain, there was a sudden flash of spiritual splendor, like a bright spark of electricity, followed by a brilliant and magnificent clear qi rushing up to the sky. It turned in mid-air, and turned into a dignified Taoist in a black robe. He walked in the air, and with his sleeves behind his back, he sang, the heaven and earth are divided into 2 parts, and the Dharmakaya is cultivated by the 5 dragons and 5 elements. The body is like the pillar of heaven standing in the Kunlun mountains, and the heart is like the sea and the mountains are like the dust of the world. Today, the divine house slays the heavenly demon, and another day, slay the ghosts and gods beyond the heavens. The voice was loud and clear, and it echoed in all directions. Zhang Yan raised his qi, and in an instant he turned into a clear light, breaking through the strong wind clouds, and arrived outside the second heaven. But his body did not stop, and he continued to go up. Not long after, he broke through a thick layer of stagnation, and his body felt light. He looked around, and he was already outside the second heaven. At this place, the noble spirit was piercingly cold, and the strong wind was like a blade. Looking around, there was nothing in the vast horizon, as if he was the only person between heaven and earth. He felt a little resentful in his heart. When the star stone stopped here, he still had to borrow the protection of the talisman, and only then could he cross the star stone, but now he treated it like nothing. This time when he achieved the Yuanying Dharmakaya, because the spiritual qi did not leak out, it was completely absorbed, and the mana in his body increased by more than a fold. If he were to fight against an ordinary peer, he was confident that he could use his mana to suppress them. He put his sleeves behind his back, and silently observed the changes in his body. Once the Dharmakaya was out, it was equivalent to taking away the mana and true vitality that he had refined 100 times, leaving only the physical body where it was. Although there was still a little mana in the body, it could only be used to meditate and cultivate, and to accommodate the spirit, but it could not be used to fight with others. Tao Zhenren was able to refine the celestial residence in the underground palace, and that was because of the uniqueness of the southern flower method. But even so, the Yuanying third heaven cultivators still liked to travel with the Dharmakaya, and that was because there were many unspeakable benefits. Although he knew about it, but after trying it one by one, he had a deeper understanding and thought that it was no wonder. The body of a cultivator was especially precious. If it was damaged, or if the foundation was damaged, it would be difficult to see the way of Tao. With the Dharmakaya, even if an arm or a leg was broken, as long as it was nourished in the body, it could be refined again. Because the Dharmakaya was not a physical body, it was extremely fast when it flew. Although it was not as powerful as the sword escape, netherworld escape, and other escape techniques, it was not far from them. Not to mention that in times of danger, it could return to the body with the fusion of source and truth technique. Unless it fell into a magic treasure, was captured and refined, or was severely injured and broken, it would be difficult to get rid of it. But although there were many benefits once the Dharmakaya was out, it had to endure the wear and tear of the outside world. Therefore, every time after a trip, it would have to return to the body to cultivate again after a period of time to make up for the loss of spirit, so it could not stay outside for a long time. And this showed the benefits of his first-grade primordial Dharmakaya. His body was in harmony with yin and yang, inside and outside as one, and the outside was hard to wear down. At this moment, it stood in the strong wind for a long time, but it did not suffer the slightest damage, not to mention wandering outside. However, Zhang Yan was slightly surprised when he inspected it. He was able to notice that this Dharma body was slightly different from what Zhou Chongju had said, and it seemed to possess many other miraculous uses. However, he wasn't able to tell exactly what those uses were for now. However, there was still a long way to go, so there was no need to be anxious. So, he smiled lightly before transforming into a stream of clear light that descended. Chapter 759. The Wang sisters, Fu Baoxing, Zhao Gu, and Zhang Boyun waited on the peak for a short while before they heard a rustling sound coming from the sky. Then, they saw a magnificent clear light falling down like a waterfall, splashing rays of pearls and jade brilliance, illuminating the entire peak. The brilliance flashed for a while, and just now, Zhang Yan's Dharmakaya appeared from within, standing there with a smile on his face. Although he was traveling with his Dharmakaya, his appearance was no different from a real person. When the 5 of them saw him, they all went forward to greet him. The Wang sisters and Fu Baoxing even said in unison, "Congratulations, Master, for completing your cultivation and achieving the Xian technique." Before Shen Baishuang left, he taught Zhao Gu many techniques. At this moment, his eyes were filled with spiritual vigor and he carefully observed according to the techniques. He wanted to see what level this senior brother's Dharmakaya was, but after looking for a long time, he had no clue. He could not help but smile bitterly in his heart, knowing that his cultivation was still too far away. He sighed and said, when senior brother was cultivating his Dharmakaya, he attracted the spirit of heaven and earth. At least he is a Tong Zhao Dharmakaya. This time, when he returns to the sect, he will definitely achieve great things. Zhang Yan smiled and said, this is not the place to talk, all of you follow me. He waved his sleeve and the 5 of them felt a surge of spiritual vigor around them. Suddenly, their bodies became lighter. When they stood still, they realized that in an instant, they had already moved from the peak to the hall in the middle of the mountain. They could not help but exclaim in surprise. Zhang Boyan said, Master's 5 elements escape technique is getting more and more proficient. Just now, I think that even if I wanted to resist, I would still be captured. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Zhang, there is no need to belittle yourself. If you are not familiar with me, how can you let my 5 elements qi easily come to you? Zhang Boyan shook his head. He knew that Zhang Yan was just being polite. If it was before, he would have some confidence. However, once a Yuanian cultivator reached the 3rd stage and cultivated his Dharma body, it would be completely different from before. After the Dharmakaya left the body, it was as if a layer of shackles had been removed. From then on, the Dharmakaya would be able to cast out techniques, be it in terms of power or speed. Both of them were much stronger than before. If they were to really fight, with Zhang Yan's vigorous magic power, he would only need to use the Heaven and Earth Lock technique to make him unable to move. If he didn't have a magic treasure to escape, then even if a few more people like him came, even so, it would be a waste of time. Only if he also cultivated to this level would he have a chance of contending against it. Because of this, before Zhang Yan and Rong Juanzhong fought, he could not imagine how Zhang Yan had defeated Feng Haiyang. He won first place in the 18 sects sword competition. Zhang Yan went to the main seat in the hall and sat down. He first looked at Zhao Gu and said with a smile, Zhao Shidi has cultivated Yuanying and obtained a lifespan of 1,000 years. I am also very happy. Zhao Gu, however, was a little uneasy. He smiled bitterly and said, although I have made some progress in my cultivation, I have not had the time to learn the supernatural power that my teacher gave me. But I haven't had the time to learn the divine ability bestowed by my teacher. I don't know if my teacher will blame me when I enter the sect in the future. Zhang Yan's expression turned serious and said, Junior, you worry too much. As cultivators, cultivation is the foundation. Uncle Master Shun will not blame me for this. It is just that the Donghua continent is facing a demonic calamity, and we cannot let go of the supernatural power and spells. Since you are going back with me, you don't have to worry about the mundane matters of the sect. You might as well use this time to practice diligently. Zhao Ge hurriedly agreed. He had asked Zhang Boyan about a lot of things in the Donghua continent and knew how big the world was. The more he knew about the situation in the continent, the more shocked he was. He did not dare to slack off. In fact, in the past few decades, he had not paid much attention to the matters of the sect. Zhang Yan looked at his 3 disciples again and said, I have been in Dongxing for more than 100 years, and I will return to Donghua soon. However, the Hanyuan sect cannot be left unguarded. It needs someone to hold the fort. Which one of you is willing to stay? Wang Kaiwei could not help but hesitate. Although she had left the bright nether heavenly lake all these years, she had benefited a lot from serving Zhang Yan. But if she stayed here, there would be no one to guide her, and her cultivation would inevitably be delayed. But she was the senior sister of the 3, so she naturally shouldered this responsibility. So, she stood up and said, I am willing to stay here. Wang Kading did not think too much. She was lively, and she was the happiest when she was free. She rushed to say, Teacher, what do you think of me? Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. Kading, with your personality, you will not be able to restrain your disciples. Everyone else can, but you cannot. You have to return to Donghua with me. Wang Kading pouted and had no choice but to retreat. At this moment, Fu Baoxing took a step forward, bowed and said, Teacher, I am originally from the Divine House Mountain. I am willing to stay here and share the burden of the sect. In reality, the person Zhang Yan liked the most was Fu Baoxing. These years, this disciple had taken in far more disciples than the Wang sisters. Moreover, he grew up in the Hanyuan sect, and there were now hundreds of his relatives and descendants who were also gathered in the Divine House Mountain. Not to mention that he had a solid foundation in the sect, he would not see the Hanyuan sect as a secondary sect, and he would work hard to manage it. So, he smiled and nodded. You don't have to fight. This matter will be handed over to Bao Xing. Fu Baoxing hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed. I will obey your orders. Zhang Yan raised his hand, and suddenly 2 rays of light flew down and landed on his forehead. He said, From today onwards, you are the Hanyuan sect master. This white tiger mystic shuttle is a magic treasure of the Qinsong school. Today, I will give it to you for protection. Take out your magic sword and let me have a look. Fu Baoxing hurriedly untied the magic sword on his back and respectfully handed it over. Zhang Yan's eyes focused. The 2 swords floated in the air and hovered in front of his eyes. After observing them for a moment, he raised his hand and put them away. He said, There are still some flaws in your swords. Before I leave, I will refine them for you in the earthly fire heavenly furnace. He then said to the Wang sisters, The 2 of you don't have to be envious. I will also take out precious materials and refine a magic treasure for each of you. The 3 of them were overjoyed when they heard this. They hurriedly knelt down to thank their master for his kindness. Zhang Yan called them up and said to the Wang sisters, The 2 of you can leave. Bao Xing, you stay. The 2 sisters also knew that he would have something else to say to this little shitty. After bowing, they left the hall. Seeing that there was nothing else, Zhao and Zhang also took their leave. When only Fu Baoxing was left in the hall, Zhang Yan then asked, I have observed your breath. You haven't found a suitable cultivation method yet? Fu Baoxing hesitated for a moment and said, Yes. Senior Kaiwei said that Master didn't say anything before he went into seclusion. She didn't dare to make her own decision. It's better to delay this matter. When Fu Baoxing was in the mystic light realm, he cultivated the yin-yang separation and reunion saber technique. This technique was very compatible with his body, so he improved very quickly after studying it. It was just that he liked swords and not sabers. The dual sword technique was a sword technique derived from the separation and reunion technique. However, Zhang Yan wasn't around, so he couldn't decide what kind of technique to cultivate after forming his core. Therefore, after forming his core, he could only cultivate his qi using the normal method. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Saiwei's words are prudent. However, since you like to use swords, after I return to Donghua, I will ask for a sword manual for you. Within a year and a half, I will definitely have a reply. Don't be impatient. If this disciple couldn't return to Donghua continent, he would definitely miss many opportunities. Moreover, after they left, it wouldn't be easy for him to guard Dongxing Mountain alone. Therefore, he wanted to make up for it in other places. He was prepared to ask the sect leader for permission to teach him the Thousand Clouds Snatch Sword Manual after he returned to the mountain. Fu Baoxing was overjoyed and said loudly, It's all up to Master. Zhang Yan smiled and waved his hand. A bamboo scroll flew over and slowly opened in front of him. It recorded in detail everything that happened in the outside world while he was in seclusion. He read it one by one and found that during this period of time, because the vitality of the 3 sects had recovered slightly in the South Continent, the situation was still the same and hadn't changed much. However, the land of the North Continent was extremely unstable with endless disputes. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and ask, What is the situation outside the mountain now? Do you know? Fu Baoxing said respectfully, Master, Shenyue envoy Chunyuji has taken over a celestial city near the eastern vast sea with the secret support of the Python tribe, attracting many cultivators from Shenyue sect to join them. Du Shixuan invited him to fight several times, but they were evenly matched. Now, he has become more and more powerful. Sect leader Zhongtai Qiao has also sent several letters, wanting to ask Master to eliminate this person, but because Master is still in seclusion, he gave up on the idea. Zhang Yan nodded. He had expected the Python tribe to make such a big move. Zhong Tai had lost the support of the heavenly abode master. Even if he had invited Tao Jinren to be his god of offerings, it was beyond his reach. He could only solve many problems by himself. Zhang Yan stared at Fu Baoxing. What do you think our Hanyuan sect should do in this situation? Fu Baoxing knew that his master was testing him and did not dare to answer carelessly. He concentrated and thought for a while before saying in a deep voice, "Your disciple thinks that we should just watch quietly and not do anything." Zhang Yan said expressionlessly, "Oh? Then sit and watch the Python tribe take over Zhong Tai step by step?" Fu Baoxing bowed and said, "Master, please allow me to report. After all, Zhong Tai has been in the sect for thousands of years, and he has obtained the supernatural Dao formula of Xianyue sect. Even though he was forced into a difficult situation by Xianyue sect, he did not hurt his foundation. When he has mastered the martial arts passed down by Ancestor Demi and recovered, Chunyu Ji is definitely not his opponent. But with the support of the Python tribe, it will not be easy for Zhong Tai to crush him. If we maintain a stalemate, both sides will have their own restraints, which is a good thing for our Hanyuan sect." Zhang Yan said calmly, "Have you forgotten about the 3 sects of the South Continent?" Fu Baoxing said, "In my humble opinion, even though the 3 sects of the South Continent will not watch from the sidelines, but after Jinren Shin's deterrence, they will only make a fuss about the Python tribe and Zhong Tai. They will not dare to come and disturb our Hanyuan sect. I think there will be no problems for the next 200 to 300 years." Shen Baishuang purposely hid his qi in front of the 3 sects Jinren, so no one knew whether he was here or not. In addition, he killed people to establish his authority. Under such circumstances, as long as the Hanyuan sect did not take the initiative to cause trouble, no one would come and provoke them. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Fu Baoxing's answer could not be said to be very clever, but it was more or less in line with what he wanted. He did not expect this disciple to be able to do much, as long as he could guard this lower house. However, the Hanyuan sect was after all a place that he had been managing for a long time. This continent had far more external objects for cultivation than Donghua, so he did not want to give it away easily. The more chaotic this place was, the less likely it would attract the covetous eyes of the people in the sect. The competition between the 4 sects was, in fact, a good thing for the Zhaoyu sect. Chapter 760. After Zhang Yan finished dealing with all the trivial matters in the sect, he turned into a ray of light and flew out of the sect. In less than 2 hours, he arrived in front of the heavenly fire cauldron. This place was considered an important place in the Deep Abyss sect. Other than the formation, there were also disciples assigned to guard the place. Today, the person on duty was Wang Caiwei's eldest disciple, Yi Lanju. She suddenly saw a ray of clear light flying over and immediately became vigilant. However, before that ray of light even landed, she felt a spiritual tide surging over and almost couldn't breathe. She immediately knew that the incoming person wasn't someone she could fight against, so she hid in the formation and didn't come out. She only said, "May I know who you are? This is an important place in the Deep Abyss sect. If you are not from the sect, please leave early to avoid making a mistake." Zhang Yan looked over and saw that the person in the formation was a petite and exquisite young girl. Her hair was combed into a bun and she wore a blue and white robe that reached her knees. She wore a long skirt with plum-embroidered skirt. At this moment, she was staring at him with her black round eyes and her hand on her sword. In the sect, other than Zhaogu, Shen Baishuang's disciples had all left. Zhang Boyan only had Zhao Yang, so this girl could only be his junior disciple. Thus, he said, "I am Zhang Yan. Whose disciple are you?" Yi Lanju was a little confused at first, but then her eyes widened and she hurriedly knelt down and said, "So it is Ancestor. In the past, I only saw Ancestor's portrait so I didn't recognize you. Please forgive me. I am disciple Yi Lanju. Normally, I cultivate under Master Wang. However, the 2 uncle masters see that I have some talent and often give me pointers." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. This female disciple was smart. She didn't want to say her master's name, but she was afraid that he wouldn't know which of the Wang sisters she was talking about. Thus, she pointed it out so that he would know she was under Wang Kaiwei. He took a step inside. Under Yi Lanju's shocked gaze, Xiao Chen stepped into the formation. It seemed like the restriction did not hinder him at all. He said, "Later, I will use the earth furnace to refine treasures. You should move back a little, lest you get burned by the true fire." Yi Lanju stole a glance at Zhang Yan and respectfully said, "Disciple is guarding the door for Shizu. If Shizu has any instructions, just call me." She stood up. He bowed again, and a mysterious light appeared under his feet as he retreated outside. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Kaiwei and Kading only have a few disciples, and their talents are not bad. It would be a pity if they stayed in Dongxing without anyone to guide them. Why don't we bring it back as well?" He slowly walked to the side of the furnace. First, he walked one round along the outer edge and looked carefully. Then he climbed up to the north side of the altar and sat on the praying mat. This heavenly cauldron was refined by Shen Baishuang. Not only did it activate the true fire of earth, but it also activated the true fire of earth. The inside and outside of the furnace were also rearranged. It was slightly similar to what he saw in Middle Pillar Continent back then. It was divided into several acres, and each room had a total of 36 acupuncture points. The bottom was further divided into 72 wells, and the levels in between were increased. In order to deal with different levels of fire, there was also a flag placed beside the furnace to control the fire. If there were enough artifact refiners, they could refine dozens of artifacts in one furnace at the same time. Although each artifact might not be of high quality, it would be enough to reward the disciples of the younger generation. The depth of a sect's foundation could be deduced from this. Zhang Yan had refined the 2 swords for Fu Baoxing, as well as the Wang sisters' treasured weapons. Originally, he only needed to use 4 acupuncture points, but now that he was here, he thought to himself, "Since I'm already here, I might as well give one to each person. Otherwise, people will say that I, as a master, am favoring one over the other." Refining a transcendent artifact would take a few years at least, and a few decades at most. Naturally, he would not do that. He was only preparing to wash off the many transcendent artifacts he had obtained previously, returning them to their original appearance, and then refine them again. After that, their shape and spirituality would also change slightly. This was the so-called refine method, and many of the transcendent artifacts in the Yu Tsang sect came from this method. After thinking for a long time, he took out a few magical weapons and threw them into the furnace along with the 2 swords. After a while, he took out another 5 jars of Sky Demon's ashes and sprinkled them down. Then he used his mana and the flag on the altar moved without any wind. It flew into his hand and with a gentle shake, it was triggered by the earth fire. It gushed out from the well and not long after, steam gathered and white smoke came out from the furnace. At this moment, his Dharmakaya was refining a magical treasure here, but his body was still meditating in the cave dwelling, breathing in and adjusting his breath. After a nascent soul cultivator reached the 3rd stage, it became more difficult to increase his mana. It was like rowing a boat against the current. If he did not advance, he would fall behind. Therefore, if the Dharmakaya were to travel, his physical body would need to cultivate and refine chi at the same place at all times so that he would not fall behind. After all, the body was the basis of cultivation and the place where the spirit was stored. If it was damaged, there would be no hope to see the Tao. Therefore, when the Yuanying 3rd-level cultivators traveled, they would try to leave the body in a safe place and set up layers of prohibition to protect it. The Dharmakaya could not go too far, but if it felt something was wrong, it would rush back in time to avoid being ambushed. For example, Hui Xian and the others, because they were rogue cultivators, they did not have a sect to rely on. Therefore, they hid their bodies in a place that no one knew. Every time they traveled, they were careful and would not fight with others unless it was a real critical moment. However, Zhang Yan was different from others. After escaping from the Dharmakaya, his cultivation was still there. He was also covered with 2 layers of treasured clothes. Even if he could not use mana to fly, He could still control the devil's treasury and the lofty cloud tower. It was enough for him to retreat in time before danger came. However, he had also vaguely heard that if the dharmakaya of a cultivator of the third level of Yuanying realm in the Insong sect was extraordinary, the sect would invite the master of Dongtian to refine a house that could be used to fly around so that his physical body could rest and not be disturbed by external enemies. As for whether it was true or not, he could only find out when he returned to the sect. 3 months later, there was an explosion in the heavenly furnace of earth fire. Fierce air rushed to the sky and the furnace fire flew. There were more than 10 magic weapons that flashed with spiritual light flew out and danced all over the sky. Some of them were attracted by the spiritual vigor of the mountains and swamps outside and wanted to hurriedly throw themselves out. However, they were blocked by the Prohibition formation and could not escape. They crashed everywhere and made banging sounds. One of them even went to Yi Lanju's place. Her internal energy was still shallow and she had been guarding the formation for the past few days, so she was already tired. Suddenly she felt something was wrong and subconsciously she sent the mysterious light up to meet the mirror. But somehow the chi dynamic of the two merged. When she was surprised and withdrew the mysterious light, she found that there was a bronze mirror in her hand. The front of the mirror was a picture of a phoenix head. It was vivid and lifelike, and there was a pair of small wings on both sides. They were not feathers or silk, but they were brilliant. When they flapped gently, they looked full of spirituality. She liked it as soon as she saw it and couldn't bear to put it down. She held it for a while and unknowingly refined it. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. She cried out in alarm and knelt in the direction of Zhang Yan. She begged for forgiveness in fear. "Grandmaster, please forgive me. I didn't mean to take this treasure." Zhang Yan glanced at her, smiled, and said, "You have been guarding here for so many days. It must have been hard on you. Since this treasure is fated with you, just accept it." After that, he waved his sleeves and kept all the magic treasures into his sleeves. He turned into a beam of light and rose up. He used 2 hours to return to the mountain gate. After entering the cave residence, he called Jingyu and said, "Call all the elders and sect masters to gather on my peak. I have something to tell them." Jingyu bowed and quickly went to pass on the order. The news quickly spread to all the celestial cities and sections. Tang Jin, Song Chiyuan, and the others did not delay. They immediately put down what they were doing and rushed to the mountain gate. In the Dexiang celestial city outside the mountain, after Go Sumin received the letter, she did not leave immediately. Instead, she first found her martial nephew, Shendong, and told him about the matter. In the end, she sighed and said, "Jinren Zhang is not from this continent. He is a cultivator from Donghua continent." Jinren said that he would return to the mountain gate sooner or later. This time, it seems that he is really going to leave. Shendong was now 9 feet tall and had a burly appearance. He had a thick beard that reached his abdomen, and he looked dignified even when he was not angry. His aptitude was excellent, and he had obtained the orthodoxy of the spirit-returning sect. In addition, he had a celestial city for his cultivation. After cultivating for nearly 90 years, he had already reached the middle of the core transformation realm. When he heard about the matter, he said happily, "I hope that Uncle Master will allow me to follow Jinren Zhang to Donghua." Go Sumin raised her head and stared at his face. After looking for a while, she sighed slightly and said, "I asked Zhang earlier, and he said that he could bring me along. But, have you really made up your mind?" Shendong's expression was firm. He said, "Jinren previously said that the Donghua continent is far above our Dongshin continent in terms of cultivation techniques and supernatural powers, as well as the temperament of the cultivators. Since Chief is returning to the mountain, you can go with him to experience it." Go Sumin sighed and said, "But I heard that the Donghua continent is currently facing a great calamity. After you go, I'm afraid that it will not be as stable as cultivating here." Shendong said emotionally, "How much progress can I make if I'm confined to one place? I obtained the inheritance of the spirit-returning sect, and it is precisely through fighting that I can comprehend and improve. The more fights there are, the faster my cultivation will be. How can I miss such a great opportunity?" Go Su-min's gaze was a little complicated. Sun Chu was very cautious when he was alive. She did not expect him to have such a brave son. Shen Dong said again, Uncle Master, although you and Uncle Master Qian each have a celestial city, you are still living under someone else's roof. The disciples of the Han Yuan sect do not say anything on the surface, but in reality, they do not necessarily look down on us. As a junior, if I can fight for a place in the Donghua continent, no one will look down on the disciples of the Quantum Inn. Go Su-min shook her head and said, Friend Zhao and the two elders Wang are all good to us, and no one looks down on us. It is just that you are too competitive. Shen Dong was startled. Go Su-min and Pavilion Master Qian were all Yuanine cultivators, so of course no one dared to disrespect them. However, it was hard to say for the disciples of the same generation. He didn't argue and just laughed. That is not a bad thing. Martial Nephew's goal is the great Tao. If I don't fight for it and just sit here, do you think that fortuitous encounters will fall from the sky? Go Su-min sighed. Since you have made up your mind, I will not persuade you anymore. However, the Shen clan only has one descendant, so before you leave, you need to leave behind a descendant. I have already found a girl from the younger generation of the Wu clan for you. Although she is only at the mystic light realm, she is worthy of you. Shen Dong was stunned, and his expression was a little weird. However, after thinking for a while, he still agreed. Then he kowtowed to Go Su-min and said, I don't know when I can come back from the Donghua continent. Maybe we will never see each other again. Please take care, Uncle Master. After saying this, he bowed again and stood up, walking out of the hall without looking back. Chapter 761. A month later, on Songju Peak, smoke from the purple copper incense burner floated into the clouds. The Dragon Country's ship was in front of the mountain. Clouds formed a hanging staircase that rested on the mountain ridge. From afar, a white line could be seen. Cranes flew back and forth, chirping. Zhang Yan was draped in an ink-cloud heavenly crane cloak, standing on the mountain peak, his sleeves fluttering in the strong wind. The Wang sisters were both wearing bright red cloaks, standing on his left and right respectively, with several third-generation disciples clustered behind them. He wanted to return to Donghua today. Therefore, Tang Jin, Song Yuanchu, Go Su-min, Pavilion Master Qian, and other Yuanine cultivators were all present. They set up an altar and incense table with the leaders of the various sects on Mount Shenwu and prepared wine to send him off. Fu Baoxing took a few steps forward and respectfully offered a cup of wine to send him off. Zhang Yan took it and drank it. He said warmly, Disciple, Han Yuan is my Qinsong villa, and it was founded by Zhenren Shin. It has been here for hundreds of years. Now that it is in the hands of the Zhaoyu branch, there is no room for error. As the leader of Han Yuan, you must take good care of it. Fu Baoxing knelt down and said, I dare not do my best. Song Chuyuan sternly said, Spiritual Master, the few of us will wholeheartedly assist sect leader Fu and protect the sect. Tang Jin, Go Su-min, and the others also agreed. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled. He then told Fu Baoxing, There is a Taoist friend in the Beimasi realm who came with me from Donghua continent. His cultivation is not below mine. If you have any difficulties, you can go to him. Song Yuanchu and Tang Jin were stunned and looked at each other. They didn't know that there was such a great cultivator hidden in Mount Shenwu. He must be a hidden chess piece left by the chief. Zhang Yan had cultivated the Yuanine body. He could come and go as he pleased. He didn't need the help of the Dragon Carp and the Moon Maiden to fight against powerful enemies. That was why he had left him here to be Fu Baoxing's right-hand man. Apart from this great demon, there were also the hundreds of thousands of demon soldiers. That demon had settled down here for hundreds of years, and there were already 1 million of them. It was not suitable for them to move anymore, so this time, they were also left behind. Even without the suppression of the mountain and river diagram, the other party was not a grotto heaven cultivator. No matter who came here, they would be able to block a few blows. While they were talking, Go Su-min also seemed to want to say something. She stood in the crowd and hesitated for a while before slowly moving forward. She cupped her hands and said, "Shenren, I insist on following you to Donghua. I can't stop him, but he is stubborn and not good at getting along with people. If he has offended you in any way, I hope Taoist Master Wan can forgive him." Shen Dong's aptitude was not bad, but his relationships with others were not good. He was worried that he would be ostracized after he entered Chinsong school. If it were any other day, it would not be a big deal. However, the Donghua continent was in the midst of a demonic tribulation. If someone tried to sabotage them because of this, they might even lose their lives. Zhang Yan looked over. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm afraid you are wrong. I think Shendong has great ambitions. Thus, I don't want to be associated with others. This trip to Donghua is a good opportunity for me to gain experience. Why should I tie him down?" Go Sumin was stunned and said, "Sect leader is right." Zhang Yan frowned and said coldly, "I am no longer the sect leader of Hanyuan. Has fellow Taoist Wu forgotten?" Go Sumin did not want to say something wrong. Hearing Zhang Yan's unfriendly tone, she broke out in a cold sweat. She hurriedly bowed and wanted to admit her mistake. Unexpectedly, Zhang Yan did not wait for her to speak and said coldly, "I heard that when you were in charge of Celestial City, you were biased and extremely unfair. You only cared about taking care of the disciples of Quantum Inn and criticized the other sections. You are punished to go into seclusion for 60 years. Without the sect leader's order, you cannot be pardoned. That is all I have to say. Go back and reflect on yourself." After saying that, he waved his sleeve. Before Go Sumin could defend herself, her vision turned black, and she was already out of the mountain. When Tang Jin and Song Chuyuan saw this, they felt a chill in their hearts. For a moment, neither of them dared to speak first. At this moment, Jing Yu came over and said, "Master, Elder Bai from Zhongtai sect came to send you off. He has already arrived at the altar." Zhang Yan said, "Ask him to come over and talk." Not long after, Elder Bai came up from the altar and came forward. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother heard that Jinren Zhang is returning to Donghua today, so he wanted to personally send you off. However, the border of the East Sea has not been peaceful for the past few months, so he couldn't leave. He could only order me to send a small gift to apologize." As he said that, he handed over a jade plate. His words were not empty words. During this period of time, Xianyu Python tribe had been harassing them. Seeing that the 3 southern sects did not show up, their actions became more and more aggressive. They had already built an island near the sea. Zhongtai sect had no choice but to mobilize many elders to deal with them. However, this left the sect empty, and Xiao Huanzhuan could not be absent at all times. Zhang Yan looked at the jade plate and motioned for Jingyu to take it. He said, "Sect leader Qiao is too polite. Elder Bai, please thank him on my behalf." Elder Bai clapped his hands again, and a disciple came over with a white rhinoceros. He pointed at it and said, "There is one more thing I want to trouble Jinren Zhang with. Is it possible to bring this mount to Clear Feather sect?" Ever since Zhongtai sect invited Tao Jinren to be their official, they wanted to send the white rhinoceros over. However, the journey was long and it was not easy to fly over. There were too many demons on the sea. Furthermore, Xianyu Python tribe was pressing on, so they could not find a reliable person to send the white rhinoceros. Therefore, they never had the chance. Now that they heard that Zhang Yan wanted to return to the sect, they asked him to send the white rhinoceros. Zhang Yan saw that the white rhinoceros head was drooping to the ground. It was weak and dispirited. It was not as spirited as it was when he first saw it. He deduced that it was forbidden. He smiled and said, "This is easy. Jingyu, bring it to the boat. After all, it is Tao Jinren's mount. Don't mistreat it." Jingyu said, "Master, I know what I'm doing." He walked over, and the disciple handed over the reins. At the same time, he gave him a golden whip and reminded him, "Fellow Taoist, be careful. This demon may look weak now, but it was controlled by Jinren Zhang's spell. It is usually very fierce. If you don't whip it once or twice a day, it won't be obedient." Jingyu took the whip and weighed it in his hand. He looked at the whip marks on the white rhinoceros body and moved closer to its ear, saying, "Fellow Taoist has seen it. I'm just an errand boy, not the master. If you don't cause trouble on the boat, eat and sleep well, and don't cause trouble, then I won't whip you. This way, both of us will have a good relationship. What do you think?" The white rhinoceros looked at him and snorted, "I want to drink 3 vats of strong wine every day." Jingyu smiled, "There is good wine on the boat. This matter can be discussed." He scolded in his heart, "I won't make you drunk." He went up and pulled the reins. The white rhinoceros obediently followed him to the boat. After Zhang Yan said goodbye to everyone, he then called Fu Baoxing over and said, "I'm leaving now, do you have anything else to say?" Fu Baoxing thought for a moment and said, "There's something I don't understand." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Go ahead." Fu Baoxing plucked up his courage and said, "Taoist Wu has a generous temperament and is usually very respectful to my master. After taking charge of the immortal city, I can't say that he's not biased, but he's never done anything that goes against my master. Just now, isn't the punishment too harsh?" Zhang Yan smiled and said meaningfully, "You are the leader of the Deep Well School. After I leave, it is up to you to decide what to do. Do you understand?" When he was in the sect, these Yuanian cultivators naturally did not dare to overstep the rules. However, after he left, it was hard to say whether or not this disciple would be able to suppress them. Just now mentioning the dragon carp matter was to show his might to Song and Tang. However, it was different for people like Go Su-min. He had to think of a way to show his kindness. Just now, he purposely found an excuse to punish them. After he left, he would let Fu Baoxing lift the ban and do him a favor, so that he would be deeply grateful. Fu Baoxing was a smart person and thought about it for a moment. He understood the reason behind it and said gratefully, "Masters love and care for me, even if I have to die, I won't be able to repay you." Zhang Yan's eyes were filled with anticipation. He stretched out his hand and patted his shoulder, "Disciple, do your best." After saying that, he turned around and walked towards the boat. The people behind him bowed and sent him off. Wang Kading was the last. After Zhang Yan got on the boat, she went to Fu Baoxing's side and passed something to him. She whispered, "Little junior brother, this is from me and my sister." When Fu Baoxing saw that it was a sleeve pouch, he guessed that there should be transcendent artifacts, pills, and the like inside. He hurriedly declined, "Master has already bestowed a transcendent artifact, how can I take the 2 senior sisters?" Wang Kading sighed and said, "Little junior brother, it's not easy for you to be here alone. I'm giving it to you, just take it." As she spoke, she pushed it into his arms and rode on the boat. Fu Baoxing shouted a few times but did not turn around. Not long after, Chidragon's boat shook slightly. Layers of spell scrolls floated up from the bottom of the boat like dazzling golden flowers. It broke the cloud stairs and slowly sailed away. Fu Baoxing had been brought to the mountain by Zhang Yan since he was young. He grew up in the Deep Abyss sect, so they had a good relationship. Seeing Chidragon's boat leaving and not knowing when they would meet again, he couldn't help but feel sad. He knelt on the mountain and kowtowed 3 times. He said loudly, "Have a safe journey, master. Please forgive me for not being able to send you off." Chidragon's boat left the mountain gate. After traveling for 10 days, it left the sea. Thunder rumbled in the sky and dark clouds gathered. This was the dark gold lightning belt outside the Dongshan continent. Back then, it took Zhang Yan a lot of effort to come here. Even the Chidragon's boat was damaged. Now that his magic power had increased, he did not need to be as passive as before. He waved his black-yellow hand and easily separated the clouds, opening up a path. In just a few days, he managed to get out of the dark gold lightning belt without any mishaps. After passing this place, there was a smooth road ahead. He got off the boat and returned to the cabin to meditate. The boat traveled on the sea without any waves for several months. On this day, Jingyu came in and reported, "Master, there's a letter from the Clear Feather sect." Before Zhang Yan set off, he had sent a letter to the Clear Feather sect, saying that he was going to visit. Now that there was a letter, he deduced that something must have happened. he said in a deep voice, "Let me see it." Jing Yu quickly presented it to him. Zhang Yan opened it and found that the letter was personally written by Tao Jinren. The gist of it was that his eldest disciple, Guolai, failed in his forceful yuanying and damaged his Dao foundation. He had no choice but to commit suicide. Because he needed to be sent to another place to reincarnate, he had no time to entertain him. Thus, he wrote a letter to express his apology. He also said that the Carp tribe had been making a lot of moves recently, and he advised Guolai not to come back to the sect to avoid trouble. As for the white rhinoceros, it was better to leave it somewhere else. After reading it, Zhang Yan couldn't help but sigh. When he first met Guolai, he was only at the Mystic Light realm, and they were compatible. However, in the blink of an eye, more than 200 years had passed. He didn't think that things would be the same, but people would be different. He originally planned to stay at the Clear Feather sect for a few days, but since that was the case, he didn't want to stay any longer. He continued to move the boat west. After 3 months, Sealed Island on the East Sea was already in sight. Chapter 762. Chiefing Island was in between the inner and outer seas. After passing this island, it would be the border of Donghua continent, which was also the territory of the top 10 abstruse sections. However, now that the Devil's catastrophe had begun, the sects on the sea would inevitably be affected. Zhang Yan didn't know the situation here, so he wasn't in a hurry to go. Instead, he called Zhao Yang over and asked, "You have entered the core transformation realm. Have you cultivated the underworld escape technique?" Zhao Yang answered honestly, "Although I have learned it, I only have a rough understanding of it." Zhang Yan smiled. "That's enough. I have a task for you. Go to the inner sea and find out the details, then come back and report to me." Zhao Yang didn't understand. "I am not from Donghua continent and am not familiar with the situation here. Why don't you send the 2 senior sisters?" It wasn't that he didn't want to go, but he felt that the Wang sisters were from Donghua, so they should be familiar with the place. It would be more convenient for them to find out information. He wondered if there was a reason behind it. Zhang Yan did have other plans, but he didn't want to tell him. He only said, after the Devil's catastrophe, most of the sects on the sea stayed in seclusion. Most of the people wandering outside are from the demonic sections. The escape technique you cultivate is from the Underworld Spring sect. This sect has been around for thousands of years and is the most powerful among the 6 demonic sections. It will be easy for you to find out information if you go there. Zhao Yang understood and accepted the order happily. He turned around and left the cabin. With a stomp of his foot, he flew into the sky with a faint yellow smoke. Not long after he left, a voice came from outside. "Master, Shendong requests to see you." Zhang Yan said in a deep voice, "Let him in." Shendong entered the cabin and bowed to him. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "What are you here for?" Shendong looked up and said, "I saw senior brother Zhao go to the sea. May I ask if you went to find out information?" Zhang Yan looked at him and asked, "Why do you ask?" Shendong cupped his hands and said, "I think my escape technique is not bad. I want to compete with senior brother Zhao to see who can find out more information." He paused and asked carefully, "If I win by luck, can I ask Zhenren about a problem in cultivation?" Zhang Yan gave him a deep look. After thinking for a moment, he slowly nodded and said, "Go." Shen Tong heaved a sigh of relief. Although the spirit returning sect was in his hands, without Go Sumin's help, no one would be able to guide him. His real intention was not to compete with Zhao Yang, but to see if he could learn from him through meritorious deeds in the future. When he came, he was already prepared to be rejected. Fortunately, Zhang Yan did not reject her outright. Otherwise, she would have to think of other countermeasures. He bowed deeply. He retreated out of the cabin and rode a cloud of ever-changing spiritual smoke, disappearing into the clouds in the blink of an eye. Zhao Yang used his escape technique and circled the vast sea for an hour, but he didn't see anything. It was as if there were no cultivators on the sea. Seeing that the path was blocked, he decided to take a risk and stopped wandering around aimlessly. Instead, he identified the spiritual opportunity and found a place with abundant spiritual energy and carefully searched for it. However, after exploring a few islands with dense spirit chi, the spirit chi in the area became even denser. He discovered that it was either the walls had collapsed or the houses had long been abandoned. Helpless, he could only search further away. But at this moment, he suddenly heard someone calling him softly. "Fellow Taoist, are you looking for a way out?" Zhao Yang was startled and immediately turned his head to look around, but he couldn't find the person. At this time, he heard the voice say again, "Fellow cultivator, don't panic. You've only entered my chaotic dust array. If you want to leave, it won't be difficult. Just listen to me." Zhao Yang couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He didn't want to fall into the array without knowing it. If the other party wanted to kill him, he would have already succeeded. He secretly warned himself that this was no longer Dongxing, but the Donghua continent where danger was everywhere. He must not be careless. He calmed himself down and asked, "How do I get out?" The person said, "Fellow Taoist, listen to me. 10 steps to the left, you will see a black rock reef. 9 steps to the right, you will see a small mirror." Zhao Yang was a little hesitant. He couldn't judge whether this person was telling the truth or not. What if the other party didn't have the means to deal with him and instead used words to trick him into entering the killing restriction? After thinking about it a few times, he finally decided to do as he was told. Fortunately, that person didn't play any tricks. After a few dozen breaths, he arrived at the main position. He saw a short and fat person from Daoren, who looked like a withered tree stump, sitting on a rock. When he saw Zhao Yang enter, he stood up with a face full of smiles. He bowed to Zhao Yang and said, "Fellow Taoist, just now, your escape technique looks familiar. May I ask if you are a disciple of the Nether Spring sect?" Zhao Yang pretended to be relaxed and said, "Fellow Taoist has good eyesight. Just now, I am using the Nether escape technique." That person from Doran's eyes couldn't help but become more fervent. He bowed and introduced himself. "I am Quan Yangshin, a disciple of Yuan Shin, so I am also one of us." Yuan Shin Gate had always been on good terms with the Mingquan sect, especially when the disciples of the two sects hadn't mastered their techniques. They could complement each other's strengths and often work together. He hid here because he wanted to ambush a powerful enemy. He originally thought that the outcome would be unpredictable, but he didn't expect to inadvertently lure Zhao Yang into the formation. He thought that if he could ask for Zhao Yang's help, his chances would be greatly increased. As for why Zhao Yang was here, he didn't have the mood to ask. Nowadays, in the Donghua continent, many disciples of the Devil's Doctrine were killing cultivators outside to collect souls to practice their supernatural powers. It was not uncommon for them to run to the East Sea. In order to build a friendship, he mentioned the names of a few peers from the Nether Spring sect that he knew, and in a roundabout way, tried to find out which elder Zhao Yang was cultivating under. Zhao Yang was afraid that he would expose himself if he said too much. After a few perfunctory words, he took the initiative to ask, "Fellow Taoist, why did you set up the formation here?" Quan Yangshin couldn't wait for him to ask this question, so he quickly told him the reason. In the end, he sighed and said, "This formation consumed a lot of my precious materials, and it can only be used once. I didn't expect you to break in, so it seems that I need to set it up again later." Zhao Yang put on an apologetic look and said, "I'm sorry, it was an unintentional mistake. It's just that I never owe anyone favors, so I don't know how to make it up to you." Quan Yangshin cheered up and said with joy, "As long as you are willing to work with me later to intercept and kill this person, it doesn't matter even if there is no formation." Zhao Yang pretended to be hesitant and said, "May I know the identity of this person?" Quan Yangshin hurriedly said, "Rest assured, this person's cultivation is at most similar to yours and mine. When I was cultivating here the day before yesterday, I accidentally intercepted a flying letter from Pingyuan sect and learned that someone sent a spirit herb to their sect today. This thing has the ability to maintain the primordial spirit and is greatly beneficial to the cultivation of our disciples. After killing him, we can split it in half. What do you think, fellow Taoist?" Zhao Yang was moved and said, "That flying letter is so fast, how can you intercept it?" Quan Yangshin laughed and said, Fellow Taoist, you may not know this, but the East Sea is managed by my sect's elder Yang Shozhen and the Blood Soul sect's elder Gong Yangzhong. They have already destroyed 12 sects on the sea, and now only a few sects like Prengyuan sect are left. Their disciples dare not go out on normal days. Every month, they can only take advantage of a few specific hours to go out of the mountain gate with a secret technique to communicate with other sections. However, they don't know that their whereabouts have already been discovered by the two elders. They just want to lure the big fish to take the bait, so they deliberately didn't expose it. These days, I happen to be on duty here, so, Zhao Yang looked at his mysterious smile and couldn't help but realize that Quan Yangxin heard that the person who came had the spirit herb, so he couldn't help but want to take it for himself. I didn't expect the Sea Demon sect to be so powerful. I need to report this news to Jinren Zhang as soon as possible. Just now he noticed that although Quan Yangxin seemed to be chatting with him freely, he was always on guard, so it wasn't easy to make a move. Thus, he was thinking about how to find an excuse to leave. At this moment, he heard Quan Yangxin say excitedly, "That person is here." Zhao Yang looked up and saw a middle-aged Taoist with black hair and beard coming from the sea in the distance. He was looking around vigilantly. Quan Yangxin said excitedly, "I will cast a spell to confuse his spirit. If you see an opportunity, please come forward and finish him." Zhao Yang said yes, and with a shake of his body, a ferocious demon flew out from behind him. Quan Yangxin was envious. This demon from the Netherworld Spring sect could devour flesh and blood, and could even pollute magic treasures. Moreover, it was not afraid of being killed at all. It was much more powerful than ordinary magic treasures when used to attack the enemy. He thought to himself, it would be great if I could ask this Taoist friend for one. While he was thinking, Zhao Yang cast a spell. The demon opened its big mouth, roared, and bit towards him. Zhao Yang couldn't help but turn pale with fright. A black light rose from his body and kept the demon away. "What are you doing, Taoist friend? Why don't you quickly take it back?" Zhao Yang originally planned to sneak and attack from behind, but the opponent's reaction was really beyond his expectation. He gritted his teeth and didn't say a word. He desperately cast the spell, wanting to kill him as soon as possible. Demons loved to devour flesh and blood. Just now, Quan Yangxin only thought that Zhao Yang's cultivation was not strong enough, and he didn't control it well when he released it. But now, he saw that Zhao Yang was still trying to kill him without saying a word. Quan Yangxin couldn't find anything wrong. He snorted, turned around, and disappeared, leaving only a tattered Taoist robe in place. Zhao Yang was startled. He hurriedly gathered his qi and swept the surroundings with his Dan Sha. He didn't know how many trees and rocks he had destroyed, but he still couldn't find a trace of that person. It was obvious that he had already escaped somewhere else. He was both annoyed and shocked. Not only did his sneak attack fail, but he also let him escape. Could it be that the cultivators of Donghua continent were all so powerful and difficult to deal with? At this time, he suddenly thought of the Taoist and hurriedly flew into the air. But in just a moment, the person also disappeared. He must have sensed something was wrong here, so he escaped. He thought for a while in the same place, thinking that he had gathered enough information, so he used his escape technique and rushed back to Dragon Country's big ship. 2 hours later, he returned to the ship and went straight to the cabin to see Zhang Yan. He told him what he had seen and heard. In the end, he said with shame, "I underestimated this person. I thought it would be easy to catch him, but I didn't expect him to escape." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If that person is from the Origin Mirage sect, then when you were talking to him, you should have been under a tracking spell. I think it won't be long before he comes to you." At this point, his expression changed slightly. He closed his eyes and thought for a moment, then sneered and said, "He came fast." He reached out and grabbed, and actually pulled a person out of thin air. He then threw him down and threw him at his feet. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.